Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Inept General bringing you a Total War Warhammer 3 future DLC video. In this video, we'll be discussing my theories for what the upcoming DLC will be for Total War Warhammer 3. If you're curious how I did when Total War Warhammer 2 came out, do check out the video for my Total War Warhammer 2 DLC speculation, popping up in the top right hand corner now. Or you'll find a link down in the description below. Some were hits, some were misses, what can I say? But let's look forward to what we might be able to expect with the DLC for Total War Warhammer 3. With games 1 and 2 having come out, I think there are some factions that Creative Assembly considered done. For example, I think Bretonnia. Although I personally would love to see a Bertrand the Brigand DLC with maybe some Brigand units. There is a mod out for said kind of that idea, where they maybe have Stork, and they are not bad hybrid shooting and fighting unit. So that could have been an interesting one, but I don't think we're going to get that. I think as far as Creative Assembly is concerned, Bretonnia is finished. Now, this is an important theme that will run through this whole video. This isn't a video on every unit that isn't in the game. That's not what this video is. This is a video of the units and DLC packs I think Creative Assembly will give us, which is by no means finishing everything that was ever made for Warhammer Fantasy Battles. Bear that in mind as we keep going. These are my thoughts on what I think CA is going to do, not what I want to see in the game necessarily. Bearing that in mind, here are the other factions I think CA are pretty much finished with. Tomb Kings, I think, are done. Vampire Coast, Wood Elves, the Dark Elves look pretty finished, and the Lizard Men. Now, that's not saying we might not get a 3LC Lord thrown in here and there. That might still be an option. But I think in terms of getting new units for these guys, they'll be very far down the line, if ever we get anything new for these 6 factions. Now, we've already had the Champions of the Chaos DLC, which was very different from how Creative Assembly have done their DLCs in the past. This represents a couple of problems and makes Creative Assembly a little bit less predictable in Total War Warhammer 3 than they were for 1 or 2, where the typical formula was either you got a race pack or a kind of versus pack where 2 legendary lords would go head to head and you'd get some units thrown in there as well. In this video, I'm going to speculate as to what DLCs might be matched up with others in the old style versus mechanic. But in the case that they are maybe just coming out as single faction packs, I'm also going to try and address that as we go along, and the timestamps will be divided by faction. So if you're looking forward to maybe hearing what your favorite faction's DLC might look like, do look for that in the timeline, or you'll find an actual listed timestamps down in the description below. Now, this aspect of not knowing the way that Creative Assembly are going to go about DLCs in the future does complicate things a little bit, but it's one of only a handful of problems in trying to predict what they're going to do with their DLCs. The first of which is obviously that problem that we don't know exactly how they're going to do or what format they're going to be in. Another problem is that there are more legendary lords and legendary heroes than units left in a lot of particularly the Warhammer 2 and Warhammer 1 factions. So we might not get all those heroes unless they start doing things like only Lord packs and no units, which I'm not sure if they're ever going to do actually, but we'll have to wait and see on that one. The other thing is that in Total War Warhammer 3 there are a number of new factions. Cathay has never really had an official army book in Warhammer Fantasy Battles, and Kislev were kind of an additional supplement army to kind of boost her out and give a bit of flavor to your Empire army anyway. And there's a couple of other factions which may be introduced in Total War Warhammer 3 and DLC that really we haven't seen army books for before. So that means that we really don't know a huge amount of, there's not a lot to go on, unlike in the previous factions where we've had army books for years. We've had multiple editions of different army books to go off and get an idea of what we're going to get in the game going forward. Another issue is the Demons faction, the Daemons of Chaos, with each of the monogods represented, is almost done. So there's not going to be, like, in terms of the army book they had, almost all the units on that army book are accounted for in the game. So there's not a huge amount of leeway there unless they start pulling from alternative sources. And which brings me on to my next problem, that Chaos is a bit of a mess in terms of the monogod factions, the demon factions, the warriors of Chaos, and Norsca. It's all a bit of a blend that kind of needs to be smashed together in my opinion, but we're going to address that later on in the video. And the last issue we're going to have in trying to predict these DLCs is that are we limited by the Realm of Chaos map? As you can see here, there's a few of these DLCs that have to occur much further to the east than this map is showing. And with the Realm of Chaos basically not playing a further aspect in the game, are we going to see different campaign maps popping up, like we saw in Total War Warhammer 1, where the Wood Elves have their own little campaign map? Are we going to see that happening for some of these upcoming DLCs in Warhammer 3? Otherwise, it does limit the kind of things we're going to see. Like, if we have to stick with this map, we're probably unlikely to see an Ind or Kheresh, because they're just not on the map, and to extend it so far right would be having to change the shape of the map altogether, at which point you may as well make a different map. And the Realms of Chaos are taking up quite a bit of real estate on the map as it stands. And as you can see here in the Immortal Empires map, I can't imagine they leave these huge swaths of space empty for the entirety of Total War Warhammer 3. That seems very unlikely. So we'll either get the Immortal Empires map filled in, or you'll need a huge extension on the Realms of Chaos map, or we just get a completely different map when those factions come out. So are we going to see a third type of map? I'm going to move forward with these DLC predictions on the assumption that we will get some kind of different campaign map, and the UI in the game seems to make that a little bit easier in terms of the way it allows you to pick different campaign maps and things like that. So it seems that maybe there's a hint in the way they built the UI that they're maybe sort of suggesting that might be a possibility, but they haven't done it before. Will they do it now? Hard to tell, but it presents a problem in terms of predicting what we're going to get in the future. As we go through these, ladies and gentlemen, do keep in mind that I'm not exactly sure how things are going to play out, so I've put a lot of timestamps in places where you'll be able to skip ahead to certain races, and because I'm not sure how packs will take shape or form, and you're just curious what I think you'll get for your particular faction in Total War Warhammer 3, do check the timestamps, and then as we go along, it's less and less sure exactly what the format different DLC packs will take. So the next DLC I think we're going to get, I think most people, we have an idea of this, it is probably going to be the Chaos Dwarves. I'm not going to go into a huge amount of depth in terms of what army units we can expect for the Chaos Dwarves, but I have done a separate video on the army of the Chaos Dwarves, and that will be popping up in the top right hand corner now, or you'll find a link down in the description below if you want to get an in-depth look at what the Chaos Dwarf army might look like. So do enjoy that if you've got the time. They will occupy the lands in the Plain of Zar, the Badlands east of the World's Edge Mountains. There's a nice spot for them on the Realms of Chaos map. So in terms of getting new maps, I don't think we'll get one for the Chaos Dwarves. That map, the Realm of Chaos map, will stay there the way it's been established for the Chaos Dwarves at the very least. So what will be our next DLC after the Chaos Dwarves? If you were to ask me without any other information what I thought it would be, it wouldn't necessarily have been this one. But I think it will probably be Sea Lord Islin versus Gut Rot Spume. And this will take the format of an old-fashioned versus pack. Now, my reasons for this are that there have been a couple of leaks already. One of the voice actors who played Teclis in Total War Warhammer 2 released a bit of information saying he was going to play a character by the name of Prince Aravel. Now, Prince Aravel himself was not hugely important, but in the days before Chaos in the Warhammer fantasy world, the elven goddess Lilith presented 3 gifts to the elves. The first of these was the Star Crown, which gave the wearer vision over all time and places that are seen by the gods. The second was the Amulet of Sunfire, which is said to have brought hope to those in despair, and no evil could abide its presence. And the third was the Moonstaff, now wielded by Teclis. The Star Crown was shattered when Malekith first invaded Safari. The Amulet of Fire was gifted to Prince Aravel by his father, the then Phoenix King, Morvael, against the advice of the Hoeth Lordmasters. Now, the prince then went off to sail the oceans to a distant land, it's not really told us where it was, and he was lost at sea, along with the Sunfire Amulet. Now, if you're lost at sea, and you're a high elf, and those two things are tied together, then you're looking probably at Sea Lord Islin sent in to try and retrieve it if he's sent on a mission to go and find this lost treasure of the elves. And you have a nice setup for an Adventure at Sea DLC. And if you're going to have Sea Lord Islin, who's the next sort of good character you can get? Probably going to be Chaos themed, given this is Total War Warhammer 3, and the sort of the prime one and the primary focuses is on Chaos. And the one that stands out most who has a relationship with the sea is a character by the name of Gut Rot Spume. Now, Gutrot Spume was a Norscan sailor, raider, hunter, killer, who was eventually blessed by Grandfather Nurgle when he went to fight a corrupted Kraken, and did, in fairness, get his ass kicked, but the Grandfather Nurgle took mercy on him and blessed him with many gifts, allowing him to rise to the position of leading many of the plague fleets in the Sea of Claws and the Kraken Sea and the Frozen Sea and the Gulf of Kislev. All around the Northern Oceans, Gutrot Spume is known to lead the plague fleets. Sea Lord Iceland, also known to patrol the Norscan coast to protect the High Elves' home territories of being invaded by Norskans. So, they're both in the same place, around the same time, fighting against each other. It's a very natural, thematic DLC, searching for this lost treasure, both of them going head-to-head. It just makes a lot of sense, and it's not a far departure from stuff we've seen in the past, so I don't think I'm going too far out on this one. I think pretty much people are agreed that this is going to be a DLC at some point, but because we've had the voice actor saying he's done his voices already for an aspect of this DLC, this leads me to believe it's coming sooner rather than later. And so I placed it coming after the Chaos Dwarves DLC. Although, you know, if it was me, I would have put it a little bit later in the schedule. It didn't seem that rushed or that much of a need for it. So let's see what I think each of these lords might get in terms of units added to their respective rosters. Now, as far as the Sea Lord goes, it's relatively simple, actually. There's a few things still missing from the 8th edition High Elves book, which is how most of Total War Warhammer 3's armies have been picked and decided upon as looking at 8th edition. And those are the Lords, the Anointed of the Surian, effectively Phoenix Guard, who are raised to the position of leadership. And the hero would be the Sea Helm, who are kind of the best of the Lefern Sea Guard, their kind of leadership, risen to the point of hero, basically. This is where I think Creative Assembly will actually take inspiration. I think it's from the Storms of Chaos, where Sea Lord Iceland led something known as the Sea Patrol. Now, in this Sea Patrol, there were some units that were given names, but the units were basically taken from the regular High Elf army and given a bit of a twist. Among these were a couple of Lorden heroes as well. You had the Stormweaver, which was a spellcasting hero, and you had, which was a spellcasting general, and you had the Mist Mage, which was the spellcasting hero. In the Storms of Chaos, they actually had their own spells. Now, I don't know if Creative Assembly are going to expand this out to create a new lore of magic for the High Elves, but that could be a distinct possibility. They only had 2 different spells as far as the tabletop was concerned, and that was the Writhing Miss, spell of 24-inch range, was a -1 hit penalty to a unit you cast it on, so a buff there in terms of defense, and the Mistress of the Deep, where they essentially summoned an elemental that would basically discourage, its haunting song would discourage charges against your units, but it would remain stagnant in one place. That might be an interesting sort of song or spell. Creative Assembly might expand that out, but we might just get the Anointed of the Surian and the Sea Helms. Everything else might stay the same. But there is the possibility of an extra lore of magic and having wizard lords and wizard heroes who can perform the new said lore of magic for the sailing High Elves. There's also the possibility of a unit that might not appear in multiplayer, but similar to the way Elfarion the Grim got his specific units in terms of fighting, there might be a specific unit in terms of a general, which would be the Commodore in the Sea Patrol. Now, I think this is maybe unlikely to be included, but I thought I'd just mention it because it was part of the Sea Patrol. And the idea of the Sea Patrol was that it was limited by one thing. You couldn't have horses in the Sea Patrol. There was no horses available to you. You could have a flying mount or you'd be on foot, and that was it. And it'd be interesting to maybe have a melee lord or the sort of the equivalent of the princes or princesses lord who was just not allowed to have a horse and either had to be on foot or flying. So that could be a possibility as well, although maybe slightly unlikely one. It depends how far they go along the Sea Patrol theme when it comes to Sea Lord Iceland. In terms of units, they also had a few units that would just stand in. So you had the Ship Company, which was just militia spearmen as the models you'd use on the tabletop. But again, room for Creative Assembly to maybe jump in and interpret this and make them slightly different, maybe slightly better, slightly worse. I don't know what they're going to do as far as the ship's company is concerned. And the other was the Sea Rangers, who were effectively Shadow Warriors by another name. Now, a fun unit to maybe play around with in terms of either the Sea Rangers or the ship's company is to maybe have a hybrid sword unit. Now, this was a champion, I believe, in the Sea Guard. So you can maybe have a whole unit of sword and board hybrid bowmen for the Sea Guard. That could be an interesting interpretation in terms of either the ship's company or the Sea Rangers, one or the other. Be quite an interesting take. I think, at least. Let me know what you guys think down in the comment. And of course, a unit we've been sorely missing in the High Elves, the Laferne Skycutter. This is where this unit will be introduced, very iconic, needs to be in the game, and I think this is the place it will be introduced. And something we've seen in the game before in the Vampire Coast DLC, but the mealworm, or maybe you could call them children mealworms, small ones. Iceland's army had access to it in the Sea Patrol. It would go along with his army. He could control it through the power of his mages. It seems a bit dark elfy to me in terms of controlling this beast with their magic, rather than, collaborative, one with nature, high elf kind of stuff. So it kind of walks the line there. But maybe that's the thing with the Sea Lord. He sort of has to compromise because he's always on the frontier. And if he has to mind control an animal rather than exist in a cooperative relationship, then so be it. So maybe he is sort of tilting towards the dark elf side of things. That is the Sea Lord's army, and I'd be a bit remiss if I didn't mention a couple of pretty iconic characters who haven't made an appearance yet, and that is Corhill and Caradrian, a White Lion representative and a Phoenix Guard representative respectively. They are heroes in the High Elf army list, and they have not made an appearance yet. Now, hopefully they might be included in this pack as free LC heroes. We have had Alistair, the White Lion, thrown in there for a Make-A-Wish kid back at the launch of Total Warhammer 3, and I think really they did kind of just use Corhill's model and make him that way. As we have seen some evidence of Corhill's axes being in the actual build of the game, so I don't think it would take too much effort to just put him in the game. So hopefully we will get him and Caradrian, because with the launch of the Anointed of Assyrian as generals, it would be good to have him in the game as well. But I don't think they'll be the leading force in this DLC. I think that's going to still go to the Sea Lord. This is where it gets a little bit tricky when we look at the Chaos side of this DLC with Gutrot Spume. Which faction is he going to be on is the actual question. Will he be on the Chaos side, or will he be a Norscan Legendary Lord? He could be both. With a lot of the mortal sort of Chaos Lords, they usually start out as Norscans. Now, it doesn't really affect him as a Legendary Lord, but it does affect the units he's going to get. So I'm going to do a slight split here, and I'm going to try and explain it as best I can, but I think if he's a Norscan, we're going to see the Norscan update come with Gutrot Spume. They're going to give Norscans access to the different Mark of Chaos Marauders, as they probably should have already. I think probably Gutrot Spume's going to be a Norscan faction Legendary Lord. So we'll go on that assumption going forward. There will be the Norscan update that comes with Gutrot Spume. We're going to get the Norscans going forward. And I think with that, the Lords in this pack may well be the Matriarch Famir, just to give the Norscans a magic casting Lord, which they don't have yet. And the Famirs are more interesting than making Shaman Lords, I think. In terms of a hero, I think we might get the Beastmaster. There's a lot of creatures that might be tied up in this DLC, and Gutrot Spume himself was a renowned hunter, and his story does involve taking down a lot of creatures, and not necessarily taming them, but, killing them, and so they might use that as a thematic way to tie in a lot of these other animals. In that case, we also have a number of bears in the Norscan army. Now, the Norscan army was mainly taken from a series done in a magazine called Citadel Journal, and in that, they did include the use of bears held by Beastmasters who would lead them onto the battlefield. Now, we've seen feral bears, Drycha has them, a few other characters have them. Why not give them access to Norsca as well? Let Norsca have some bears. There's also a signature model of the Cursed Deton. Now, these are giant-looking creatures with two heads. One side's very strong, one side's a bit withered and weak. The story behind these guys is that they're not actually giants, although they might look like it. They're actually a cursed tribe of men. Now, this tribe of men asked for the Chaos God's blessings, and when the Chaos Gods called them to join a massive invasion of the southern lands, they instead went around pillaging all the villages of their fellow Norscans, killing their women and children, absolutely trashing the altars to their gods, and robbing them of all their riches. And so the Chaos gods were like, no thank you, don't do that to our worshippers. And then they took the whole tribe, and it said that they just smashed 2 individuals together, usually one weak and one strong. And unlike the sort of perfect sort of ignorance that comes with being something like a Chaos spawn where your mind is just taken away from you, these guys have complete mindfulness, and they are just trapped in these horrible, painful bodies that they're stuck with. Now, these guys had a pretty interesting mechanic when it came to the tabletop. They were able to pick sort of one of a series of gifts. One was Gibber, where the kind of weaker head of one of these creatures would just sort of wail and cry and drool in pain, and that would just sort of really put off any enemy within any kind of distance of them, and they'd suffer a -1 penalty to leadership. The other one was a Scaled Horror. And that's that they got an improved saving roll, and the fact that whenever anything did damage to them, it would kind of spew out this poisonous blood as well. So the Scaled Horror was a pretty interesting one there. Another one was Man Cipher, giving them an additional attack and impact attacks. Runecaller was the last one, and what that did was it allowed them to recall some of their old tribe's magic, and basically made them a level 1 wizard, and they could either use Law of Shadows, Death, or Beast. So limited on the number of spells they'd get, but it's interesting in terms of the variety. I'm not sure how Creative Assembly would do that. I doubt they're going to make 4 different kinds of these guys, but you never know, they might do in terms of giving them the different gifts, or they might just throw it all into one, which would make a pretty pumped up, very useful giant creature that could be used in the Norscan army. So look forward to seeing this horror probably make an appearance in Total War Warhammer 3. Blight Kings. Now, there'll probably be a unit available to the Nurgle factions as well in terms of the cross availability. If you get this DLC, you'll be able to get them with the Mono Gods and with the Warrior of Chaos, Nurgle, or Undivided places. So I think it'll be a unit that spreads across all those factions. But I think this is where we introduce the Blight Kings, a very iconic unit. Yes, admittedly an End Times unit, and Creative Assembly can sometimes be a bit funny about that. But I think they're so born into the mind of people who think of Nurgle forces that you're going to have to do the Blight Kings at some point or another. And why not with Gutrot Spume, who essentially looks like a massive Blight King himself. Another thing Gutrot Spume was known for was being a prodigious hunter. He'd hunt anything, and in his story there's a whole bunch of things involved. It's mentioned trolls and a whole bunch of other creatures, including the Slaughter Brute. Now, the Slaughter Brute and the Mutilative Vortex Beast are 2 missing units from the Warriors of Chaos roster. They haven't been introduced yet, and there is a possibility that they get introduced, or at least one of them gets introduced in this DLC, and available for Norsca Chaos as well, and probably in that matter-of-fact way for the Mono Gods, probably, or at least the Undivided, for the Mono Gods, probably, but maybe not actually for them. But the Slaughter Brute, I think, might be part of a different DLC, and I'll explain why when I get to that one. But there is the possibility that the Slaughter Brute or the Mutilative Vortex Beast are included in this one, and so look out for that. That's just an inkling I have. But I also think that to go against the Lefern Skycutter, we're going to get another flying beast, and that will probably be the Chimera. So we'll get the Chimera coming in to maybe go head-to-head with the Skycutters in the air, and that is another missing unit from the Chaos factions. And of course, I think maybe as a end campaign bonus, or when you get to the final mission, or maybe just as you go along, he will also have access to the Merworm. Now, he's known to have tried to hunt these beasts in the past as well, so I think that it will be the thing that maybe binds them together, or they're both racing for the Sunfire Amulet, but along the way, I think both factions will get access to the Merworm, which will be kind of interesting. And we know there's already a model in the game. It's just a matter of doing the animations for it, and it looks pretty good as it goes. A slight issue that the inclusion of Gutrot Spume does bring into the Norscan lineup is that he is a dedicated champion for Norsca to Nurgle, or I think it's the Crow in terms of the Norscan speak. But then that opens up the possibility of having other legendary lords from the other gods probably having to be represented in some way, shape, or form. So either we're going to get Norsca with Gutrot as the main sort of DLC, and then Sea Lord Islands the FLC, which I doubt. I don't think that's the way it's going to go, but you never know. But it means that there will probably have to be some associated gods for the Norscan faction that we might get dotted around as free LC along the way, or, you know, might be included in this pack as well. And I got some kind of front runners that I thought could be included in that. And those include Skylar Anthengrim. Now, those of you who know Skylar might have a bit of a problem with this. He is effectively a huge hero of Khorne who sailed around on his Norscan longboat, making a fantastic name for himself, receiving more and more blessings from Khorne until his body couldn't take it anymore, and he kind of erupted into this Red Hulk monkey ape type creature. And he lost his mind, and he doesn't have his mind. He's just a rage monster looking and hoping to serve Khorne. And he's become just the champion of Khorne's spawn, really. So he's a Chaos spawn. Now, this means that he does have a handler, and in the lore, his handler is a guy named One-Eyed Urlok. So One-Eyed Urlok could be your legendary lord with Skylar as his accompaniment. But you could get Skylar Anthengrim. He is a character in the Warriors of Chaos book and would make a good Norscan representation for Khorne in this lineup. We also have, of course, Gutrot Spume for Nurgle. And I think for Slaanesh, I did struggle a little bit to think of who'd make a very good fit. And I came up with Sturkar, and he is the lieutenant of Archaon. And he is a Norscan chieftain. Well, he kills his father, becomes a Norscan chieftain, rises to the position of being Slaanesh's representative lieutenant for Archaon as they continue their march south. So he could be an interesting choice for the Norscan Slaanesh representatives. And I struggled a bit with the Tzeentch one as well. I didn't want to go anyone who I thought fitted too well into Warriors of Chaos, or, in fact, the Demons. And this character does fit in well with Warriors of Chaos, as, to be fair, do all the Norscan champions, because that's where they all come from anyway. But I settled on Eccold Hellbrass. Now, this is an old-school character, a very fun... He wasn't a Norscan originally, which maybe might mean he might not be in this pack. He was actually a man of the Empire, who then traveled to the north and gained his gifts from Tzeentch. And he got something called the Breath of Life and the Windblade. And this meant he could continuously heal wounds even after he was killed on the tabletop. And he could actually resurrect if you managed to roll a 6 on his healing roll. So, you know, a really interesting character there with the gift of the Breath of Life. The Windblade could sort of fly around on its own. It could allow him to fly. A real weird character that would be great to see represented in Total War Warhammer 3. But those are my leading contenders for if this does include representatives of each of the Chaos Gods with the Norscan pack, or maybe as FLC later on. These are my front runners for who might be included. Let me know if you agree or disagree down in the comments below, but I think that's who it will be. Now, in terms of where both of these starting factions will place on the map, let's use this flag as a stand-in for the High Elves at the moment, the Kafik flag, and this random Nurgle Rebel flag, where we think that Gutrot Spume might place. Now, in the Realms of Chaos, both of them do patrol the Northern Seas, so let's just place them a little bit far apart, but, you know, easily accessible. I assume the Sunfire Amulet will be somewhere in this Northern Sea when you're looking for it in the Realms of Chaos map. And these are sort of the areas they can both go looking for it. I placed the High Elves there because there's some history with at least diplomatic connections with Marienburg. And I thought, let's put them in that kind of territory, maybe, you know, nearer the coast, a bit far away, because they're not going to take over Marienburg itself. I think that was going a bit too far. So, you know, put them on the tip of the coast there so they can sail the oceans to their heart's content. And Gutrot being able to raid the lands of the south, get in the oceans all around. You know, just a pretty good position for him there, I felt. In terms of Immortal Empire's map, there's two options here, I think, for me. I think we know where Sea Lord Island's going to go. He's going to go in those islands down in the south. I think they were created for him, basically. So he'll be down there sailing the open oceans. And I think Gutrot Spume might still start up in Norsca, although that is very far away for them to put two opposing factions whose short-term campaigns might be to get rid of one another. So there is another option of moving him south, giving an actual Chaos Norscan presence in the south there, might, you know, shift it up a bit rather than placing them all in Norsca, And so that's a possibility as well. So I think it'll probably be one of those two. I think Sea Lord Island, we know where he's going to be. Gut Rot, I'm a little bit less sure about. So looking forward to seeing that DLC. I also think this will come with the Norscan update, but I think I'm probably going to do a separate video on all the things I'd like to see in the Norscan update. So look out for that. That'll be probably coming along in the next week or two. That's not what we're going to focus on here. I just think that's what the DLC will look like. The Norscan update will contain a whole bunch of changes that will be included for free, but that's what I think the focus of the DLC will be on. We also discussed the possibility, if we're getting Gut Rot Spume, we might get the other Chaos factions represented in the armies of Norsca as well. What would that look like? So we already mentioned the heroes we'd be getting, and we're going to use these faction icons from the end game of the Norsca campaign to represent them on the map. We've got Striker representing the Serpent there with Slaanesh. We've got Akold up there representing the Eagle and Tzeentch. So where will we place them in the map? So Realms of Chaos, I kind of toyed around with the idea. We want them spread out. You don't want everyone, but everyone needs a coastline, really, if you're going to be Norsca. So we're going to have to put someone probably over there in the Sea of Dread. And at the moment, there's not a huge Tzeentchian presence down in the south. So, you know, we'll throw them in there at the Sea of Dread. That will be where Hellbrass makes his home. Up in the northeast, going up against the Slaaneshi faction, coming in on the tip of Norsca, maybe facing off against Festus. We'll have Skylar Anfingrim and maybe his master, Urlok as well, looking after him for that Norscan faction. Last up, we have the Slaanesh representative down in the Northern Empire, maybe just having made landfall, striking in, maybe doing a vanguard for his master, Archaon. That'll be them coming down into Nordland in the Realm of Chaos map. In terms of Immortal Empires, let's have a look at where we're thinking about them. The Norscans all got moved around a bit, which left a lot of space in the center of Norsca. So we put Sturkar up there in the north, watching over the Norscan sort of sea, watching the Realm of Chaos, perhaps waiting for his master and striking out at Malice and what have you. You know, we always have to give a Slaanesh faction some access to those delicious elven souls. So he'll be able to hit some Dark Elves up there. In terms of the others, just going forward, we'll have Gut Rot Spume in the south, just so he's somewhere near the Sea Lord, if that happens. And Skeggy, another Norscan outpost that would be great to play from. We put Hellbrass out there, maybe looking to hunt down some extra magics in the lands of the Lizardmen. And, you know, his life springs from Hellbrass, so going through the jungles of Lustria seemed an appropriate place to put him. And, you know, there's not really a Tzeentchian faction attacking the Dark Elves, or really has easy access to the High Elves at this point. So, you know, good to place him there. It gives a bit of variety in terms of enemies out there. And last but not least, we have Skylar Anfingrim on the southern side of Norsca, just hitting the Empire. A bit of a Khornite presence closer to home, really collecting skulls from the Skull Throne from the Empire from the get-go. So that's where I think could be good placements for these Norscan extra lords, if we do get them, coming along with the Norscan update, just to make sure every Chaos God is satisfied that they have an equal number of champions. Next, I would have probably put this before the sea-based DLC, but I think it'll probably come afterwards because we haven't had any sort of hints of lines. But if they do line readings that far ahead, I'd be surprised and pleasantly. But I think Cathay needs a definite update pretty soon. Now, in a series of interviews, Andy Hall was on when the game launched, basically giving hints to a couple of other YouTubers, I'm not sure in the main press or not, about what we might expect up and coming from the Cathay faction. Now, we are slightly shooting in the dark. We've had hints of Cathay. There have been a couple of things mentioned here and there in the lore. Tamurkhan, an adventurer from Chaos, who we'll get to a little bit later, had encounters with them and fought their armies. And so we have a bit of an idea of maybe a couple of the units in the army based on those stories. But on the whole, we're kind of shooting in the dark here, apart from those interview hints that we've got. So we're going to base what we have on those. And the first thing we're going to look at is the Legendary Lords. Now, we know there are 3 other dragon siblings currently wandering around Cathay, running large swathes of the Empire. We have the Fire Dragon in the south, we have the Jade Dragon running the central bureaucracy, and we have the Water Dragon or Wind Dragon running the coastline in the east. I don't think we're necessarily gonna get a huge amount of DLC focused around one or the other of these dragons. I think they'll probably come along as free LC characters because you can't overdo the dragon thing. We already have 2 dragon lords. You're not adding a lot of distinction and differentiation. And I think going forward, that's a key thing for Creative Assembly. They don't want to introduce units that there's already maybe a unit for. They don't want to make any sort of units redundant. And I think it'd be fun to have the entire dragon family together, and they'd probably act very differently in terms of the way they played and the magics they could call upon or whatever. But I think they're going to go for something a bit different, a bit less redundant, and that is the Monkey King. Something I know a lot of people out there are very excited for. The Monkey King of Cathay once took over the entire empire, used a Skaven as an advisor, quite the character, and he is based in southern Cathay, based in the Mountains of Heaven, which I don't think are really accessible in either Mortal Empires or the Realm of Chaos as such at the moment. On the Realm of Chaos map, it would be a bit further east. They'd have to expand the map a little bit and drop it maybe. And in the Immortal Empires, I think it's probably most of the Mountains of Heaven are basically meant to be the Himalayas, but they are mostly grayed out at the moment, in grayed out territory. So they'll probably be ungrayed out for when the Monkey King makes an appearance. In terms of lords and heroes, it's a bit tricky here. We don't really know what they're going to do. In the game, there's a description of the Monkey King as looking like an orangutan, a gorilla, or a baboon, or even as a spider monkey by some. I took this as maybe a hint that we're going to get maybe a variety of monkey generals, and perhaps people are confusing them with the Monkey King when they see these generals leading the armies. Or they may be heroes, one way or another. A melee hero would be pretty welcomed in the Cathay roster. A more melee-focused lord would be pretty good. We've got the Magisters at the moment, but they're kind of buffing up troops. They're not necessarily more sort of a warrior priest type of general than necessarily the monkey warriors might be. They might be the Croxigor generals of the lizard men, just really focused melee fighters. And that could be pretty interesting in terms of a new general or hero sort. So bear that in mind, we could have one of them. One thing we do know there will be, though, is monkey warriors. Now, this has been described by the head writer at Creative Assembly, that they are known to be sort of the second most populous people in Cathay. They fight in many of the armies around Cathay. They're not all strictly tied down to serving the Monkey King, so you will get monkey troops in many armies of Cathay. That's literally how it's been described. So we will get monkey troops. Whether these guys take sort of, ape-like gorilla qualities, or whether they are sort of more slender, quicker, baboon-type warriors, maybe both. Don't know, but we will probably get monkey warriors in this DLC, which will be fun to see. Another thing we'll probably be getting is some form of fighting monk. Now, whether this takes the form of a hero or a unit of fighting monks, I don't know, but we are probably going to be getting Kung Fu monks in this DLC, something to look forward to. A low armor, high damage dealing unit, and some really good animations hopefully in there as well. Knowing Creative Assembly's art team, they will probably do a fantastic job with these guys. And we will have Tiger Men. These will be your shock infantry, maybe your monstrous infantry. Just absolute apex predators causing carnage on the battlefield. Now, these guys were mentioned by Andy Hall in the interviews, and we literally see there is a Tiger Man village in the areas of Cathay near the south, near where the Monkey King would emerge. And so, we're probably going to get Tiger Men, and Tiger Men would be super cool. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing Tiger Men appear in the armies of Cathay. One unit that probably is a front runner for maybe being a hero rather than a flying unit are the Crowmen of Cathay. There was a whole bit about how these were the agents of the Moon Empress. So these guys are her messengers, her spies, whether they act as a single individual on the battlefield or a murder of murderous crowmen, who's to say? But there are descriptions of them in the Tamurkhan story, where they are known to sort of lift men up into the sky, tear out their guts, and whether they do that as individuals or as a unit, we're yet to see. Maybe both. Maybe they'll be a hero unit, and they'll be able to serve as, a flock going around the battlefield, killing folk. And those are the terrifying feared agents of the Moon Empress, and will probably be included in this DLC as well. There'll be a kind of an animalistic theme to this Cathay DLC, I believe. There may also be a kind of shock cavalry, which I think Cathay are sorely missing in terms of the temple dogs. New other statues come to light, the famous design of either dogs or lions at the temples of the Far East. This might be a Nippon unit later on. As you can see, there were models made for these way back in the early days of Warhammer, but they were never really sort of expanded upon. And as you can see, they're looking more like they're in samurai armor in the ancient models, so they may be holding them in reserve for Nippon. If not, we'll be seeing them as a shock cavalry for Cathay. They will just have a huge charge, devastating any unit they careen into. So that will be very good, either the Temple Dogs or Temple Lions introduced there. And last, but by no means least, I think they're going to do something with pandas. Games Workshop has never shown the most restraint in terms of adapting mythology or even fictional works of other people, so I just don't see how they're going to resist doing some cool panda unit. So, you know what, no one's mentioned anything. I haven't seen this written down anywhere, I haven't seen Andy Hall mention it, but I don't think GW has the restraint not to do something with pandas in a Cathay-themed army, so we're probably going to see something to do with fighting pandas in there as well, and I think fighting pandas usually sell like hotcakes, so we're probably going to see some form of fighting panda in there. Now the question comes, will this be a one-faction DLC? You do all those units, you throw in the other three siblings, and you go, that's Cathay, boom, you've got it. That's the whole faction finished, there you go, Cathay done, enjoy. Got 4 legendary lords, you've got a whole bunch of other units, and you can call it there. And you can expand out, as I said, there could be multiple variations of the monkey units, from orangutans to gorillas to baboons. They're just a huge, that's 3 units right there. You throw in the crowmen heroes, the monkey generals, the shock cav. You could make it one DLC, or you could thin that out a bit, maybe only 1 unit of the type of monkey warriors. That's it. It's kind of show some restraint, maybe save a bit for a second DLC, although I'm not really sure what they'd put in that DLC as of yet, but that could be an option. Otherwise, this would be another Versus. Now, who would the Monkey King be going up against? Being placed in the south, his most immediate Cathay representative who would fight him would be Li Dao, the Fire Dragon, who takes care of the southern regions of the Empire. They have been at odds before, and they might be at odds again. But to the south of the Mountains of Heaven, you've got a whole bunch of other threats. You've got Ind and Kheresh, who I don't think at this point the Cathay DLC comes will be in the game yet. But I think they'll become as huge race packs. One drop, you get the whole army in the DLC. So probably not one of them. Who does that leave? Well, there is chat of a Dian Qiang, who was the ex-leader of the cult of Tzeentch in the Empire, and he was chased out by the Monkey King when the Monkey King was in charge. So back at the about 500 years before the start of the Total War Warhammer timeline. And he might still have his life extended by his Chaos God and be wandering around, having sabotaged the Monkey King's efforts before. That'd be a Tzeentchian-themed one, but I think, in terms of the amount of legendary lords that Chaos have to get through, I don't think they're going to be inventing basically other ones that didn't exist outside the context of one story that wasn't even in the army book. So I doubt it'll be him. Who else could it be? It could be Skaven. Now, the Monkey King did have a Skaven advisor. The Monkey King did have a Skaven advisor during his time as leader of the Empire of Cathay. So, they might have fallen out, could be going up against the Skaven, that's a possibility. But I think more likely is probably going to be the Beastmen. So I think there's a lot of Beastmen, particularly in the northern lands of Kheresh. So that would be right in the area of the Mountains of Heaven. And there's not really a Beastman in the Immortal Empires that far east as of yet. So getting some Beastmen out in that territory would be a fun little shout. So, I'm going to theorize that maybe there's going to be a Beastman Legendary Lord out there. And it will be a Versus pack, maybe with the Fire Dragon thrown in at this point as a 3LC Legendary Lord, just to add a little bit of flavor to the direct area that this one will be taking place in. So in terms of the Beastmen, who have we got and who might be leading their forces against the Monkey King? Well, we've got Goros Warhoof, patriarch of the Centaurs, a drunken, shagging world traveler, wanders far and wide, impregnating anything and everything he can find. In his drunken ravings, he's claimed that he is the one who has fathered all Centaurs in the Warhammer world. God knows what other creatures he's made in his eternal travels. Maybe he claims he's bred a lot of the weird and wonderful Beastmen-like creatures in the Far East, but he might have wandered that far and go up against the Monkey King. A couple of our other leading contenders might be Moloch Slugtongue. He just brings devastation wherever he goes. Slugtongue is a very powerful character, but in terms of what CA are going to do, he might be a bit too similar to Morgor, in terms of, like, you know, he brings corruption and desolate wherever he goes. And he is quite thematic with what I think the units will be in this DLC, but I'm not 100% sure he'll be the one who'll be included. There's also Moonclaw. Now, Moonclaw could be quite interesting because he was never really modeled. He literally fell out of the sky in his story and was part of the Green Moon of the Warhammer world and is praised and kind of just is a lunatic mutant beastman. No one really knows what his story is. The troops that follow him just follow him out of reverence. He kind of mutters incoherent gibberish to himself, up to something, but no one really knows what he's doing in the Warhammer world. And there is an area in the Realms of Chaos map called the Forest of the Moon in the far, far east, and that might hint at them wanting to include Moonclaw, tying in with that moon-like theme, and they pretty much have an open license to kind of do whatever they want with him in terms of the way he looks and the way he plays. There's a lot of sort of creativity around there. But Moonclaw's a bit of an aloof. I don't think people like him as much. I don't think he's as in demand as someone like Goros. But I think, you know, gun to my head, it's actually kind of hard to choose between these three who'd be the legendary lord for this faction. But I'm gonna say Goros. I think Goros, because of his popularity, and he's a fun character, and just to get him out there and involved in the game. Now, in terms of units, what will this game have? I think this will mostly be like the Champions of Chaos DLC, but for Beastmen, it'll be marked Beastmen. So, marked versions of the Ungors, the Gors, and the Minotaurs. That's going to be a huge part of this DLC, I think. We already have the Cornite Minotaurs, I think, but we're going to get a whole bunch more Nurgle ones, stuff like that. I think that will be all the marked Beastmen in this DLC. And just to throw something on top, so people don't accuse it of just being a reskin pack and nothing else, they're going to maybe give us a big model, so probably the Praeton, a huge flying monstrous beast that would add, you know, some backup for the Harpies in terms of flying or in terms of air superiority for the Beastmen. A really cool unit there that they would include. We might also see the incarnate elemental of beasts. This is a creature given physical form, sort of concentrated wild beast magic, taking from that wind of magic. And it is the physical embodiment of the fury, mercilessness, and hunger of the wild. It's really the nearest the Beastmen come to sort of a demon of their own, really, not counting the demons of the Chaos gods they worship. But I think it could be included. It's a bit of an iffy one here for me on the incarnate elemental beast, but there's a good concept there, and because, you know, all these demons are being summoned by sort of various factions, or the closest thing each one can come to demons, perhaps we get to see the incarnate elemental of beasts make an appearance for the Beastmen as well. So I think that would be the Beastmen army, all the marked Chaos units added to the roster there, and maybe even some marked Beastmen, giants, and a whole bunch of other stuff. I think it'll be a huge amount of reskins and the Praeton thrown in on top. So I think that's what we're probably going to get for the Beastmen in this DLC. And to be fair, we're getting a lot of new Cathay stuff, so they might, you know, the artists still have to spend time making the marked Beastmen versions. And we'll probably get some new mechanics around the Lord as well. So, you know, it'll be a fun adventure all round. And that's why I maybe might hesitate on Goros, because he's not necessarily the most marked by chaos. He doesn't have the most gifts by chaos. He's just a massive drunken centaur who goes rampaging through the world. So he might be the free LC, and then they give it to Slugtongue. That's a possibility, but we'll have to wait and see in terms of that. But, you know, gun to my head, I'll go for Goros if we're not getting him as a free LC Lord on the side, just because people want to see him more in the game than I think any other Beastmen Legendary Lord. If I'm wrong, let me know in the comments if you'd prefer to see one of the others, but that's who I think will be in it. So let's take a look at the map. We'll be using this symbol here to represent the new Beastmen faction with Goros, and we'll use this symbol that we've managed to dig out for the Monkey King. Very apt, I thought it was, so we'll use that one. Looking at the Realms of Chaos map, we do have some mountains on the far right-hand side that one could argue, just due to the orientation of the way this map is done, are part of that mountain range that the Monkey King lives in. So we'd put him there, and I think we maybe move a Beastmen faction to the far east, because they don't really have a lot of just pure Chaos Beastmen out there as it stands. Maybe Goros, on his wanderings, managed to appear in the world out in the far east. It's a bit on the edge of the map, so, you know, the argument could be made that we might be seeing some kind of expansion here into maybe different kind of campaign map. But sticking with the Realm of Chaos, because it's the one we know, and in Total War Warhammer 2, we didn't get any separate campaign map, so we'll stick with what we know, and he'd be right on the edge, and I think the Beastmen would be relatively near him, able to march into Cathay and cause trouble in there, and also able to deal with the Monkey King. That's their placement on the Realm of Chaos map, really hitting the edge of the map there, but we'll wait to see what happens. And on the Immortal Empires map, this is a bit more fun. Hopefully they'll expand that area to the south of Cathay a bit, at least give us some mountains for the Monkey King to live in. And that's where I think he'll be placed, and along with the Beastmen to the east of him, giving something different for Nakai to fight. There are some undead around there as well for the lizard men. So, you know, really spicing up that southern Cathay area a little bit as well, in terms of, you know, just more exciting villains to go against and to fight with. So those are the placements of Goros and the Monkey King. Now, I also did mention the other siblings in the Cathay lineup, and I think we will see them maybe as free lords or as part of another DLC with extra units we haven't heard about yet. We won't really know till we see some form of Cathay army book when the Old World comes out, which God knows when that will be at this point. And we'll use these flags to represent those factions of the other siblings. So in the Realms of Chaos, as we know, Li Dao, the fire dragon in the south. South on this map actually means a little bit to the right. So Li Dao guarding the southern right bit there. Their sibling, Yin Ying, the sailing head admiral of the fleets of Cathay, heading up in what is the east. And then the Jade, oddly, just because of the way this map works, that is more the center of Cathay, where it is, around sort of the Forest of the Moon and the Imperial Road. That leads to the area where the Jade Dragon, Wanbo, would be hanging about. That's where they'd place on the Realms of Chaos map. In terms of Immortal Empires, same stuff, but the map's a little bit more straightforward. So we do have the Jade Dragon centrally off to the east. We've moved them a little bit south because, you know, we've got Felhut there who'll cause a number of problems. And so we have the Admiral of Cathay down by the River Delta, and we have Li Dao over there having to deal with the Monkey King, having to deal with the Beastmen, having to deal with the Lizard Men, really maybe having his hands full a bit there. And there are some Jade Vampires around that area as the game currently stands, and we'll get into them a little bit later in this video. That's how I see things standing for Cathay and any kind of Beastmen versus DLC. We might not get it against Cathay, you might get it against someone else, but just bear that in mind. So we'll have the Monkey King in the Mountains of Heaven, Goros either to the east or south of him, giving him trouble, trying to break into Cathay as the two face off. Now, around this time, between these two DLCs, we'll probably be approaching the 100th character. Creative Assembly have mentioned that they're going to try and make a big deal about the 100th character. Now, in my mind, the two most important characters they haven't included yet are Nagash and Thanquol, the Skaven. So I thought maybe it might be one of them who are introduced as the 100th character, but I think they're going to want to give away the 100th character for free. And this makes me think they're not going to give away two of their biggest money draws yet away for free. They still run a business. They're not going to give away Nagash for free. They're not going to give away Thanquol for free. They need people to pay for those. Those are two of the biggies that people are looking forward to. Which then drops us down a tier of stuff I'm excited about, but stuff that they could include for free. So you're probably looking at iconic characters that, you know, will be struggle to be part of a paid package. So I think you're probably looking at maybe Joseph Bugman, you know, the legendary ale maker, or you're maybe looking at Harry the Hammer, the first ever character of Warhammer. He is a Chaos Warrior as well, which matches with the theming. So it might be Harry the Hammer who comes in rather than those other big two. But we'll probably get that FLC Lord around this time, so bear that in mind. Next after I think there'll be a break. There'll be sort of 2 normal smaller Lord DLCs, and then we'll go back into a race pack. And this is where I think we might get our first new campaign map for Total War Warhammer 3, and that is when Ind makes an appearance in the game. Now, for those of you who don't know, Ind is a human kingdom. It is a empire and civilization, does a lot of spice trading, and, you know, knowing the way that Games Workshop makes these armies, I don't think we've ever seen any Ind units. There's been talk about Ind a little bit in terms of their trading a lot, but there really is not very much in terms of what kind of army they might have. So we really have to go on a idea of what Games Workshop tends to do, which is take history, take mythology, take some local wildlife, take a little pinch of local religion, smash it all together, and you're probably going to get your Games Workshop army. So for Ind, we're going to be seeing a lot of elephant stuff, I think. I think they're probably going to give the tiger stuff to Cathay. Ind could claim some tiger stuff. Maybe they both have access to tiger men. Different kinds of tiger men, maybe, who knows? But there'll be a lot of elephant stuff. We can also look at some of the religious stuff. There'll be a lot of stuff based around the Hindu gods. So we're going to see a lot of multi-armed kind of creatures, a lot of multi-faced creatures. But, you know, Games Workshop aren't known for subtleties, so that's kind of what we're seeing. We're probably going to see a sort of Shiva-based character or hero or god or monster coming in, something like that. And I think that's how Ind is going to look. We can see how some of the human troops might look by looking more at the historical stuff. So we're looking at maybe some matchlock rifles. There's a lot of very interesting bladed weapons from the ancient empires of the Indian region. And we can see some of their weaponry here. Some very interesting stuff. Lots of different blades and axes and the very sort of ornate maces that would be very nice coming in for the different sorts of units that they could make in Total War Warhammer, and for the Army Book of Ind, which Games Workshop will probably be working on if we do get an Ind race pack. So they'll have it written out, much like the Cathay book is already written out, much like the Kislev book appears to already be written out in some kind of draft form within the vaults of Games Workshop at the moment already, for the sort of release of the Old World, which they really should be getting on with a bit by now. It seems to be running a little bit late, if you ask me. And here is some ancient armor from the region. You know, very ornate, very nice. Sort of practicality with the chainmail there. Armored elephants, as well as maybe some kind of Beastman elephant variant, will probably all go into the armies of Ind. So this was more of a vision board rather than me just completely shooting in the dark and naming some historical units that maybe exist in the thing and then throwing in my own ideas, because they really could go in any direction. And I'm not just going to waste your time with blind guesses. So I think this is a good idea of kind of what that army might look like, to give you a bit of a taste. So we'll have Ind coming in at that point. So we'll be using this symbol to represent Ind, and of course all the legendary, well, all or if not all of the legendary lords of Ind will be in or around Ind itself. And that presents the problem we were talking about before. On the Realms of Chaos map, Ind isn't there. The map could expand a bit to the right, and that's where you could maybe fit in at least the top bit of Ind, if not the entire peninsula, as it were. And that's why it makes me think there is maybe the possibility of a different campaign map, because if you're going to do Ind, you're not going to cram in 4 Legend Lords. It depends how far they're able to move the map to the right. And I think they have a hankering to get rid of that Realm of Chaos map. So we'll have to wait and see what they do. There is a likelihood that they do another campaign map when they bring in Ind. And due to some timing stuff, and I talk about this more in the timeline section when I go into a bit more detail about when we might expect each one of these DLCs, that Ind will be kind of pushed by Games Workshop at the same time. So that might affect when it comes out. And by that time, you know, they might be able to justify moving a campaign map over to the right a bit. Join me for the timeline chat to talk a bit more about that. For now, that's where Ind would be. You'd have to move over the Realm of Chaos map, and it's just in Ind on the Immortal Empires map. Next up, I think we'll be going to one of the original races for Total War Warhammer 3, and so we might be getting a Kislev one by that point. Any legendary lord I'd care about is actually already in the game, but we have had some hints from lead writer in terms of what else we might have to look forward to. And those have been twofold. And there are hints in the game at this of the Golden Knight, or Naryashka Lesa, who has taken over from her father. The Golden Knight is a position of sort of the best warrior in Kislev. It's said that she's an even better warrior than her father before her. She's given this enchanted golden armor when she takes up the position of the Golden Knight. This is a new invention by Games Workshop, and not a huge amount of reverence because I don't know a lot of its history. And until we get the army book or anything like that, the excitement has to be a little bit limited for the Golden Knight, I think. And that's why I think the Golden Knight will be a free LC. Some have said she might be a legendary hero. She was compared directly to Ludwig Schwarzhelm for Karl Franz the Emperor, who also isn't in the game yet, but we'll get to that issue later. And he is the bodyguard of the Emperor, his standard bearer. And so, there could be an argument made for her being a hero, but I think she'll probably be made a legendary lord because Creative Assembly have usually made characters legendary lords, except for a few rare cases. It's not exactly going to push units as the Golden Knight, so I think we are going to see her be an FLC lord. And in terms of the legendary lord we are probably going to get Mother Ostangia, who is effectively Baba Yaga. In the old lore, they basically just said Baba Yaga in the Kislevite lore, but, they changed the name. But it's essentially the same thing, hag in the woods, maybe is a protector of the land, maybe kidnaps children, runs around in a house on massive chicken legs. That is her. She'll probably be Legendary Lord representing the Ungol people. Now, if you guys have watched my Kislevite history and army breakdown and Legendary Lord breakdown I've done, the series will be popping up right now in the top right-hand corner, or you'll find a link down in the description below for that. But she will probably be leading the Ungol people. Now, when Warhammer 3 first launched, they created the character of the head of the Church of Ursun. He was a bit overdressed for me. He should be more bearskin, a bit more cool looking, if you ask me. But, he looks a bit weird and annoying. And he is a bit weird and annoying. I was expecting more of a kind of warrior covered in bearskins, that type of thing, as the old stories and the old lore used to have those priests looking. But we will also have her representing the Ungols rather than a religious faction. This is that Kislev is really made out of two main peoples, one of them being the Ungols. And the Ungols were kind of moved aside and are slightly, not hugely, but slightly second-class citizens in the Kislevite society. So we might get a pack theme around them. I think this will be mainly made out of units that we haven't seen for Kislev before. I can't really guess a huge amount at what we're going to see in this pack, but here's the best I can make out that we're probably going to see. We're going to see probably heroes based on the archetype of Mother Ostania, which is the Hag Mothers and the Wise Women, the Hag Mothers being the Lord version, the Wise Women being the heroes. And we do cover them in my army list, but they will have access to, being able to summon spirits, some healing magic. They have a whole lore of magic of their own in the old Warhammer Fantasy role-playing books about Kislev. So these are established, these heroes and generals of the Wise Women and the Hag Mothers. If we only get maybe one of them as the Lord rather than the hero, we might see the introduction of Druzina. Now, Druzina are effectively young nobles, so we would very much be looking at them to fill in the role of nobles in the Empire. They'd take care of training, stuff like that, be good melee fighters. Probably, knowing Kislev, have a pistol or something, some kind of hybrid. Maybe like the Witch Hunter a little bit, but slightly better fighter than that guy in melee. Something akin to that for the Kislevites. One thing I think could be included is the one piece of artillery they did have. They kind of made up Little Grom, but the Uragan cannon, kind of like the organ cannon, led around on horseback, a little bit more mobile, maybe not as many shots, but that's what the Uragan cannon would be. Maybe led on horse. They've maybe overdone the bear. I never thought I'd say that, but they've maybe overdone the bear thing in the Kislev army at the moment. Giving bear mounts to everyone seems a bit over the top. Axemen, I think, is something that is kind of covered. Like, the Corsairs can fight with hand weapons, but maybe a lightly armored, small pistol-wearing axes, fast, slightly like berserkers, maybe with a bit of frenzy to them, can cover a lot of ground. That would be an interesting unit to add in the game. They did have units in War Master, which was kind of the big scale, the tiny little models, but big scale Warhammer battle game that was released a long time ago. But I think they might be superfluous. That's a bit of a dodgy call on the Axeman. I'm not sure if they're going to make an appearance. It's just an idea. And then we have the Ungol Horse Archers. Now we have the Dervishing Horse Cavalry, which is the lightweight cavalry. They didn't call them Ungols, but maybe this might be an upgrade like the Horse Masters are for the Marauder horses in the Chaos Army. And you upgrade both the light cav fighting and the light missiles, and you call those better quality ones the Ungol Horse Archers. that could be a possibility just to really distinguish the Ungol part of the DLC. So that's what I think we're probably going to see from Kislev. Just a few ideas. It's not a lot to go off, really, and Kislev has really been filled out for a lot of the stuff we were expecting in terms of the roster at launch from Total War Warhammer 3. So who would this little Kislev faction led by this hag perhaps go up against? It's not a lot of great options, I'll be honest. So looking at Kislev, it's not a huge draw. It's a bit of a, in terms of the other DLCs we've had up to this point, it's maybe one of the least exciting packages I managed to think about or put together. And that might be my fault. Maybe I'm just not thinking of something or haven't researched the particular element. But I think that's what we'd look at. And so I think maybe to offset this is also going to be a versus pack versus the Skaven. And there's only one Skaven Lord they have to still do, and that is Thanquol. And Thanquol is known for looking for the power to do what? Summon Vermin Lords. Now, some of you might not be aware of who Thanquol is. Thanquol is a character who appeared a lot in the Gotrek and Felix saga. He appeared in a number of video games for Warhammer Fantasy. He is kind of the blockbuster character for the Skaven. Whenever up to anything nefarious, it's probably usually Greyseer Thanquol who is behind it. We don't have a Greyseer Legendary Lord yet in the game. Kind of need one. I think Thanquol's going to be our guy in the next. If they don't include Thanquol in the next Skaven DLC, I think people will be up in arms a little bit. And he has mucked around in Kislev a lot. So I think we're going to see Thanquol make an appearance. And with him, as I mentioned, he is known for summoning Vermin Lords. We're going to get Vermin Lords. Now, whether we get the single Vermin Lord, this is obviously a slightly older model. We have had upgrades. And with those upgrades came different varieties of Vermin Lord. And looking at the kind of options for this pack, I think we probably will get those varieties because it's not going to be a huge pack. There's not a lot left to do to fill in the Skaven army. So in terms of the varieties of Skaven Lord, we have the Warpseer, the Deceiver, the Corruptor, and the Warbringer here. Kind of encapsulating a lot of the different aspects of the Skaven. The Warpseer obviously representing the magic users of the Skaven, the Deceiver being, the assassins, the Corruptor being, the Clan Pestilence representatives, and the Warbringer, being that kind of queek, fighty warrior representative. Now, I hope we do get all four of these guys represented in their different abilities, because, it gives a bit of variety, a spice of life, where the Warriors of Chaos have the 4 greater demons. These guys, the equivalent would literally be these Vermin Lords, who are basically the demons for the Skaven. So they hopefully will make an appearance in Total War Warhammer 3. We also have the possibility of the Exalted Vermin Lord, which was a Forge World model. Now, I don't think this might present itself as the old Forge World model did, because I think that we might have an Exalted Vermin Lord, but I think it's more going to be like the difference with the demons, where you have the Lords, and then you have the Vermin Lords as characters potentially in an army, or units in an army. So I think we're going to get that distinction rather than them modeled differently like the old Forge World Exalted Vermin Lords. Another unit we're probably going to get in this DLC will be the Storm Fiends. Now, the Storm Fiends were obviously an End Times unit, but I think they're so iconic and so many people want them, they're going to include them. And there's a few varieties. There's 6. There's the Doom Flayers, the Wind Launchers, the Grinder Fists, the Short Gauntlets, the Rattling Guns, and the last one is the Warp Fire Projectors. So we might get 6 varieties of these guys, maybe 6 at most in a unit. That might be a bit of a push, maybe even 4 in a unit and see what they do. But I'm really looking forward to seeing these guys on the battlefield. I think there's kind of a must include, really. In terms of what else we might expect, because that's not a lot in terms of, 4 varieties of Vermin Lord and 6 varieties of Storm Fiends. It's not a huge amount. So we may get one thing that's a bit of a niche pick, but because of the appearance of the Chaos Dwarves earlier in the DLC schedule, we might get something known as the Warp Doom Magma Cannon, which was part of a basically made campaign between staff at Games Workshop. But it's an idea of maybe some kind of flame artillery or some kind of magma lava launching, warpstone lava launching artillery would give a bit of a different touch on some of the more classic and known artillery that we've seen the Skaven have so far. But, that's just an area where they could expand out a little bit if they wanted to. There's a room for maneuver around the new artillery piece if you're looking for stuff to include in this DLC. There are a couple of units in the 8th edition that haven't been included, and those are the Giant Rats and the Rat Swarm. I don't think we're going to see the Rat Swarm, if I'm honest, and the Giant Rats kind of had their place usurped by the Wolf Rats. So I don't think we're going to see either of those units making an appearance in the Total War Warhammer franchise, I'm afraid. Let's take a look at the map for Kislev and potentially Thanquol and where they might place on the 2 campaign maps. Looking at Kislev, I know some people have said they would like to see a Kislev campaign away from Kislev. And the Realms of Chaos, it's not really, I don't think you're going to see a Kislev faction out by sort of the middle of Cathay or something like that. It just wouldn't make any real sense from a lore perspective. Maybe from a gameplay perspective you could justify it, but this is how I think it might play out in the Realms of Chaos. I think we're going to get them, relatively close to each other, and we're going to have Mother Ostankya in the very northern part where maybe the Rupsmen are now, and then we're going to have Thanquol on the other side of the mountains, coming across, being aggressive if he needs to, but there's maybe some neutral factions in between to buy some time for either player when they're playing out the campaign before they have to face off against their enemy. Mother Ostankya, obviously in Kislev, because, she is of the land, and the land is Kislev, as the old saying goes, and she will be in the sort of northernmost realms, leading her Ungol warriors into battle, or, doing magic to help them along. And Thanquol has had many interactions with Kislev. He's plotted many nefarious schemes in and around the area. And so Thanquol being up north in the mountain ranges near Kislev isn't too much of a stretch. And, keeps him far enough away from Frot to still make it pretty interesting, but still has Frot to support if he needs, and has the mountain ranges to work his nefarious schemes into. So I think that's a good placement for them, maybe getting sandwiched a bit there with Boris on the other side of him, but I'm sure Thanquol can come up with the goods to fight off these 2 Kislevite factions, going on to cause all sorts of mayhem in and around the Empire as well, I'm sure. Those are the placements for them in the Realms of Chaos. In Immortal Empires, I think for stuff coming up later on in this video, we have to move Thanquol up a bit. So we moved him to Khazak Doom. Now, Gottrex and Felix had an interesting story in Khazak Doom while Thanquol, I think, was chasing them. I don't think he made it there himself, but he is aware that's sort of the direction they headed in once. So you never know. He might be investigating, if I remember correctly, that's how it went. He might be investigating what went on up there and is heading up into Khazak Doom, where that current AI Skaven faction is. So you could put him up there. And in terms of Mother Ostankya, still roughly in the same area, maybe on the other side of the mountains in that Norscan area, trying to expand the land of the Ungols, perhaps, to carve out a little niche and maybe expand the borders of Kislev for the first time since the Great Chaos War. Not too different from their positions in the Realm of Chaos, making the action-packed northern part of the map a little bit more action-packed. Next up, we have Tamurkhan. Now, this DLC is much talked about in Total War Warhammer 3 because a lot of the regions covered in Total War Warhammer 3, this was a story about a champion that last had the information on all of those regions. It was really kind of the last time we heard about Cathay before the end times. It updated the roster of the Chaos Dwarves when the story of Tamurkhan came out. It really did light up a lot of the areas of the Warhammer world in terms of our knowledge of them that are covered in Total War Warhammer 3. So Tamurkhan, you'd expect to play an important role as a DLC character coming up for the factions of Chaos. I think Tamurkhan will probably be a warrior of Chaos. Tamurkhan himself is actually a parasitic maggot-like creature that was once a man, but was so transformed by the powers of Nurgle that it's now a huge sort of toddler-sized maggot that jumps in and forces its way into the body of hosts and then takes them over and wears them as kind of rotting meat sacks as it goes around all the time with, bits of flesh sloughing off of them. In his most infamous rampage across the old world in Warhammer, he was wearing the body of a ogre lord. So that's probably the way he'll appear in Total War Warhammer 3, on top of his toad dragon. Now, I think because this is such an important character, I think this might be a standalone DLC, much like the Champions of Chaos one was. And that means we'll probably get other Champions of Chaos represented as well. Tamurkhan's story, of course, begins in Zanbaijin rather than ending in it, like we saw the last DLC. So there's a nice bit of thematic connection there as well. If we presume we're getting 4 Chaos Champions with the Tamurkhan DLC, well, probably, these are my guesses for who we might get. So of course for Nurgle, we have Tamurkhan himself. I think maybe Arbal the Undefeated for Khorne, mounted on a huge flesh hound. Galrosh for Tzeentch, a corrupted Ulthuan dragon. And I think Dekala, is, if I'm pronouncing that right, is a corrupted dark elf who went and gave in to the powers of Slaanesh. And that is her in the bottom right-hand corner there. So what will we get in this DLC? We'll get the gaps filled in for the Warriors of Chaos, being, you know, the magic lords for Slaanesh, the halberds for Slaanesh and Nurgle. All those gaps will be filled in, so all the Chaos variants have being able to fill in their rosters, except for the Hell Scourgers for Slaanesh. They'll stay in Slaanesh's thing, but everyone else will probably get a copy of every other variant of Chaos Warrior. So there'll be that to look forward to. We will also probably get in this packet Chaos Ogres. Of one, probably they'll have Chaos Undivided, and then one probably for each of the Chaos Gods as well. And Chaos Ogres, because Tamurkhan himself will be inhabiting the body of an ogre. And so I think this is the opportunity they'll use to introduce Chaos Ogres, which of course are part of the Warriors of Chaos army list. Now on Tamurkhan's adventures, he also went through past lands of the Sky Titans, what are now known as the Giants. And in doing so, he enslaved a huge amount of them and sent them in to be part of his massive horde. And so I think they'll take this opportunity to give us marked Chaos Giants. We've got a little bit of a hint at it at the Regiment of Renowned Chaos Giant that we have already for Nurgle, but I think we will get standardized Chaos Giants with each mark of Chaos upon them as well. We'll also get marked Chaos Trolls. Now, the most famous of the marked Chaos Trolls are probably Bile Trolls, which are Nurgle Trolls. And he did have to face off and recruit Chaos Trolls when he went through some Goblin territory. So another part of the Tamurkhan story. And so we'll probably see Khorne Trolls, Tzeentch Trolls, each variant of Trolls for Chaos. And hopefully for access for Frog, because hopefully he'll get access to all Trolls in the Warhammer world for his Norscan faction updates, but we'll have to wait and see on that one. We'll also probably get, as they're going to have to model his Toad Dragon, some form of feral Toad Dragon as well for the Warriors of Chaos. And this is probably where we will get one of the last units we need for the Warriors of Chaos to complete their 8th edition roster, and that is the Slaughter Brutes. So the Slaughter Brutes themselves are massive creatures of chaos that are puppeted by a champion of chaos. So they have all the skill of an experienced warrior, of all the strength and ferocity of these fearsome creatures that they are. On top of the Slaughter Brutes, Games Workshop itself can be a bit lazy at times, so they just adapted the model a bit and called it a Mutilith Vortex Beast, which is slightly different. They do behave quite differently on the tabletop. But if they give the Mutilith Vortex Beast all the abilities it has on the tabletop, this will be a regenerating Mortis engine that probably has a spawn summon. So that's how it could potentially be a very OP piece for the Warriors of Chaos. In terms of characters, Tamurkhan did have a character, Sal, and his mount, the Nightmaw, which is this horrible spawn-like creature. And we may get Nightmaws as a unit by themselves, and we may get Sal as a unit, as a hero, as a legendary hero, or he may just be one of the ancillaries, like we've seen a lot with Malice, where a lot of his siblings are ancillaries, people in his story come on and give him campaign bonuses. He might just appear in that faction, but it is worth mentioning him as he does play an important part in the story of Tamurkhan. Moving forward on the assumption that this Tamurkhan themed DLC will be a Warriors of Chaos DLC, straight up, single faction DLC, let's have a look at the heroes we think are going to be part of it, and we'll assign them these symbols to show where they might place on the campaign maps. And so, as you can see here, we've laid everyone out. Tamurkhan himself will be coming out from the sort of far north there, near the Zanbaijin area. His story obviously started in Zanbaijin, and then he marched out to terrorize the realms of the mortal world. So, Tamurkhan starting up there makes a lot of sense from a lore perspective. We have Arbal starting in the Mountains of Morn. Good to have a Khornite presence in there, give the ogres some rage to have to deal with. And, if he has access to Chaos Ogres in this DLC, it could be a fun Khornite Chaos Ogres charging in to deal with Greasus and the Chaos Dwarves, who of course have their territory to the south, or down, is a more accurate way of putting it, on this map at least. So that is where Arbal would be. Moving on from him, we have Galrosh in the mountains. Now, Galrosh, like many of the Ulthuan dragons, likes to sleep for centuries. He's known to have come over to the old world, and is known to have previously caused a whole bunch of trouble to everyone, including the elves and men, but he has particularly been known to have killed one of the dwarven kings. Resting up here gives him access to, having some more lovely dwarf meat, as Galrosh, once second mightiest of all Ulthuan dragons, finds himself in these accursed lands, trying to do his master Tzeentch's bidding. And last but by no means least, we have Dekala over here in the east on the edge of the map. Now, she might be in the Haunted Forest, but, she's serpentine and multi-armed. I don't think Creative Assembly would be able to resist having her interact with Kheresh, which is a snake-like culture further to the east, and within with the multiple arms, much akin to some of their gods. The fact that she sort of fits in that part of the world, I don't think is something that Creative Assembly are going to overlook. So I feel they're going to put her over there, although she admittedly is a dark elf and not from these regions, so bear that in mind. When we take these guys over to Immortal Empires, how might we fit them in? My thinking is Tamurkhan maybe come a bit further south, because we've got some Warriors of Chaos factions already up there, maybe on the Bone Road, coming in, able to attack Cathay, able to attack the Chaos Dwarves, deal with the Ogres. All factions he was famous for fighting in his story, and so putting him in a pretty central position here gives him access to fulfilling all of those roles. We have taken Deshala, and we have put her way down in the south, you'll see, in the wastes, just where the gates for the Jade Sea and the Dread Sea intersect. This might seem a bit of an odd placement, and she is pretty isolated. There is a shipping lane a bit far away from her. Hopefully they give her access to another one if they do put her down there. But when we get Ind and Kheresh, which may be a while away, admittedly, she'd be interacting directly with those human factions straight away. And I think it's a good place for coming out of the Chaos Wastes, as many Chaos champions want to do. I'm a bit iffy about it because it is a bit isolated at the moment, but in the grand scheme of things, it might be a good place for her, maybe where she ends up, rather than when she starts in Immortal Empires, but it's an interesting position for her, I think, down there. Galrosh, we've kept in the World's Edge Mountains. We've moved him a bit further south, able to deal with the Dwarves, the Skaven, and who also is in that neighborhood? Imrik. So, very thematic there, able to maybe take on Imrik for all his dragon taming, set his dragon brothers free from the corrupting touch of this high elf, and have them join his forces. That could be a fun little mechanic for Galrosh. And Arbal, we have moved to the northeast, and he will be coming down on the walls of Cathay as well as Village. So maybe Village hitting from one side, Arbal from the other, coming in to take on Cathay. It's good to get more than one Chaos faction battering the door down of Cathay and hopefully coming in and causing them all sorts of trouble. So that's how I could see them playing out in Immortal Empires. I think they'd be fun start positions. Again, this is up in the air. Creative Assembly could do anything they want, but, I wouldn't mind these placements. That's where I think would be good for each of these lords. Now, in terms of free DLC, there are a couple of characters that would fit really nicely with this DLC that I thought were maybe worth mentioning. The first of which is Gark Ironskin. And he is an ogre who has just devoted himself to chaos and is a lord for them. And he is just draped head to toe in armor. And his mount is, as you can see, is a complete sort of creature of sort of demon-like armor, like a giant juggernaut. And he would be a nice character to throw in. An undivided Chaos Lord, let's say, and he gets huge bonuses for Chaos Ogres. It might be a nice little touch to give people who want to build Chaos Ogre-themed armies a go, and maybe go up against the sort of normal ogres, shall we say, as they go in. Another character worth mentioning at this point is an Empire character, actually, and that is Elspeth von Draken. Now, I'm not going to give any spoilers to the Tamurkhan story, but suffice it to say, she plays a pretty significant role in the story. And so this might be an opportunity for them to throw in a female Empire Lord, which we don't have as of yet. So they may use this opportunity to do that as well. This might be whittled down. For example, we might only get Chaos Ogres as Undivided, and we might only get Bile Trolls, and they might whittle it down for less work and then make it a versus pack as well. But who would they go versus? It's really sort of a heads up at this point in terms of Tamurkhan. Probably Cathay, if they do 2 Cathay DLCs. We'll have to wait and see on that one. So I think that's what we're going to get. I think it will be a single faction DLC like the Champions of Chaos, including Tamurkhan. And I think that's the way it will play out. Moving on, let's talk about the Ogres. Creative Assembly are on the record as saying they don't like to do DLC for DLC, and by being a pre-order bonus, Ogres are technically a DLC faction already in the game. So it's a bit weird, this one. I'm not sure if they're going to do this or we're going to get most of this stuff as free LC down the road. But there are some significant gaps in the Ogre lineup, unlike something like, say, Daemons of Chaos, which one could argue is pretty much done and dusted as it is. Ogres, despite it being a DLC, isn't quite finished yet. And what we're missing is a couple of characters. We're missing Golfag, the most famous Ogre mercenary in the Warhammer world. He's called Golfag Maneater. All other Maneaters take their name from him. That's how famous he is. He will probably be... he's been around since the 80s, old Golfag. And he made an appearance in Dogs of War and stuff like that. But he is a very famous character. Might be a free DLC, might be a paid DLC. I'm not sure. He needs to make an appearance at some point. We also have Bragg the Executioner, a kind of hero version of the Bruisers, which are an actual missing hero in the Ogre's race at the moment. And so we'd have Bruisers as a hero. And these would be sort of melee-focused, morale buffs, good heroes to have in terms of the Ogres. And we're missing Yetis, pretty iconic unit. Very surprised they didn't make it into the original TSC, so missing Yetis. And we're missing Thunder Tusks. So, those are the units we're missing in the Ogres, and that could in itself be half of a Versus DLC. But I don't know if we're going to see a Versus DLC for a faction that's already a DLC faction. So it's a bit odd and up in the air for that. Now, if you only have these units that I've mentioned now, those are actually kind of missing. It's not a variant of any kind. Those are things we don't have and need to be in the Ogre roster to complete it. Going forward from this point, it's kind of stuff that you could argue there are variants of it already in the Ogre race, so we might not see them. But if they're trying to stretch this out to be a full second DLC on a DLC, we might get the following included. And that is a dual weapon man-eater. We've had the man-eater with greater weapons. We've had the man-eaters with pistols. We don't have the dual weapon man-eater. That could be a possibility as well. And I think the model has always been pretty cool that Games Workshop always had for that. And we also have a bunch of Noblars. So if you're making this a full Versus DLC, you might make it a Noblar Lord, the Bruiser as the hero, the units I've mentioned, and then maybe fill it in with the couple more of the Noblar units, in case anyone was mad enough to want to make a full Noblar army, whether you make it Lucky Gits or Man-Biters or Pigback Riders. It really is just a shot in the dark if they include any of these, if they do a DLC for a DLC. CA have been pretty good about this in the past, except for when it came to sequels, so we have seen it happen. Whereas, like, for Wood Elves, we got a DLC for Wood Elves, despite the fact that was a DLC in Warhammer 1. But in the same game, I can't think of them doing it in the same game in terms of a DLC for a DLC. So they might stick to the discipline on that one. I might be wrong, we might see them do it. But let's wait and see. It's a bit of an iffy one. That's what I just thought I'd point it out and let you know there is room for half a Versus pack in here. But again, they could just give us those units drip, drip, drip as the life of the game goes on as free LC. In terms of the Ogres, let's use this symbol for Bragg, and we'll use this symbol for Golfag. And in terms of Golfag, he's known for being a mercenary, Dogs of War, old world, sort of really old school character, and so he kind of has to be in the Empire. So we know Scrag's going to move. Don't know if he's going to move in Realms of Chaos, but he's going to move in Immortal Empires, it seems like. Where he moves to, hard to say. But in terms of the Realm of Chaos map, I think maybe Golfag takes up that position in Middle Mountain, able to hit out at all parts of the Empire. He is very known for a mercenary, so there is a small chance we see him in the Dogs of War pack, as opposed to the Ogres, so bear that in mind. But then getting back to who we think might be the main character in the Ogres, and that is Brag. And I think Brag, we need some more Ogres actually in the Mountains of Morn that are playable, and we've moved him to the northeast of the mountains, near the Bone Road, guarding that area, able to come into Cathay, able to fight off maybe Tamurkhan early on, take on Kairos, Fate Weaver, and deal with Arbal on the Warriors of Chaos. So a lot of bad factions around, and, you know, there are a few AI Greenskin factions in there as well. In the Immortal Empires map, a good place for Golgfag, I think, would be actually sort of Carrick Hearn. Around there, able to fight in the Border Prince area. Maybe he does become a Dog of War character, or is maybe available to both factions through some kind of quest battle. And, you know, in the Border Prince's area there, technically in a mountain range, good area for him. He can fight dwarves, he can fight the Southern Realms, he can fight Greenskins, he can fight the Empire, he's not even too far away from the von Carsteins up there as well. So a lot of options, a lot of his classic enemies, a lot of the people in his history he's dealt with. I think it's a really cool central position and would make a very fun campaign. In terms of Brag, still keeping him in the Mountains of Morn, moving him maybe a little bit east in Immortal Empires, so he's not sort of right next to Grimgor. And so fighting Grimgor, fighting the Chaos Dwarves, if he moves far enough, Tamurkhan, still a bit of a problem over there, and, you know, maybe lending some support or some more rivalry to Greasus in the mountains, helping him out there. So that's where I think these two legendary lords will be for the Ogres. Okay, now let's talk about the Dwarves. Now, the Dwarves, for the most part, have a pretty complete list. There are some variants of certain things missing, and a couple of lords, so let's go through it fairly quickly and what kind of things we might expect from a DLC. I think any Dwarven pack will become part of a Versus pack. At this point, pick and mix who they go up against. There's nothing thematically that I think will necessarily tie them to whoever they pick, but this is what we are looking at as far as Dwarves go. So, Legendary Lords. We've got a couple of candidates. We've got Joseph Bugman, the infamous. I mentioned him. He might potentially be a free DLC when it comes to the 100th character, a very famous Warhammer character, Joseph Bugman, brewing the finest ales in all the Warhammer world. We also have Grim Burluxon, a young upstart engineer, the kind of engineer that might have a gyrocopter mount, which would make a pretty fascinating character. And I think, you know, he'd be sorely missing if he never made an appearance in the game. So hopefully we might get him at some point, but I don't think he is the favorite for this DLC, just in terms of tying it together thematically and in terms of what we're missing from the Dwarven roster. Malachi Mackayson is a Dwarven Slayer engineer. Great friends with Gotrek and Felix. They've had many adventures around the Warhammer world together, often riding upon one of his slightly less reliable inventions. So Malachi is wandering around, and in terms of what we have left for the roster, he fits in very nicely and thematically. So let's go through the units, and let you guys tell me if it makes sense to make him the Legendary Lord. First off, we have the Lords and Heroes that we're missing from the Dwarves, and that is the Demon Slayer and the Dragon Slayer. And so they need to be introduced as a Slayer Lord, generic Slayer Lord, and generic Slayer Hero for the Dwarves. We also have the potential, this is kind of a bit of an off-piste one here, but there has been some sort of talk of a Brewmaster, but I think the Rune Masters would fill a role. He'd probably be a kind of a buffer for units, morale, vigor, stuff like that. But I think the Rune Master maybe fills that role, so we might not see a Brewmaster, not an official part of the roster as a hero, but, you know, might make an appearance down the line if we ever get a Joseph Bugman. Kind of as the generic type to his Legendary Lord sword. Moving on from the Brewmaster, we have one of Malachi's inventions, and this is the Thunder Barge, not an official GW model here, but the Thunder Barge, just a huge blimp, and we've seen Cathay have big floating, you know, artillery units. Why not get the Thunder Barge going for the Dwarves? They will love it. And we also have the Axe Hewer, hurls axes, a lot of armor-piercing damage, probably in Total War Warhammer, and it will probably be quite short range relatively, maybe even shorter range than something like the Flame Cannon or something like that. But when it does hit, it can do a lot of damage in quick succession. So the Axior, another one of the Slayer Engineer's inventions, as you can see him there, showing it off to his Slayer pals. And we have perhaps the Doomseekers. Now, we already have 2 types of Slayers in the Dwarven roster, so how would the Doomseekers fit in? We have the Slayers with armor piercing and anti-large, and we have the normal Slayers who are anti-large. I think the Doomseekers would find a really good niche if they became a kind of anti-infantry Slayer unit. It just fills in that niche. They can just come at guys and do a lot of damage. Pretty vulnerable, not a lot of armor, if any, and, you know, they'll go down pretty quick if you're shooting at them. But if they get in and amongst your infantry, they will cause all kinds of chaos. Now, on the tabletop, they played in very small units, maybe 2 or 3 of them at a time. So maybe they'll also go by the limitation that there won't be that many in a unit of Doomseekers. But that's how they could perhaps fit in to this Dwarven DLC. And that's about it for it. So it's all Slayer based. So I think Malachi is really just the natural choice for a Legendary Lord in this pack. He's a well-liked character. I think he will pull in the crowds when he makes an appearance. People love the idea of the Thunder Barge, the Axe Hewer, pretty iconic bits of kit. Even though the Thunder Barge, I don't think, ever got an official model. In terms of Malachi, let's use this icon to sort of place him on the map. And in the Realms of Chaos, he could turn up at Slayer's Keep. It's a bit of a boring pick, and I know the Slayer King is already there. But, you know, start up, be able to recruit the Slayer King as well for this faction, a kind of Slayer-focused faction. I think that would be a fun thing. Maybe in the Realms of Chaos, you could move him over to the Mountains of Morn, but I think it is going to get a bit crowded over there at some point. So having a starting position in the old world on the Realm of Chaos map still, able to maybe ally or deal with Kislev. There are Greenskins around. Thanquol's not too far away. You have a lot of the forces of chaos coming down. You have Galrosh in the mountains to maybe go and deal with. It could be a good little battle spot there, if not a little bit on the boring side. In Immortal Empires, however, I have put Malachi in the Mountains of Morn. I like having a dwarf element there. In Realms of Chaos, it's maybe a bit crowded, I think, in the Mountains of Morn, but, you know, it could be there for both. Around this area, able to strike out at the Chaos Dwarves, able to deal with Ogres, able to deal with Chaos factions coming in, Greenskins, a lot of the enemies. And, you know, with his Thunder Barge and his different inventions, Malachi is probably the only Slayer to get there, and leading a bunch of Slayers all looking for their doom into this very dangerous territory of monsters and corrupted dwarves. So I think Malachi on the Immortal Empires in the Mountains of Morn would be a great little addition and have a lot to deal with and be a fun place to play. So let's talk about the Empire. Probably still, even including the Total War Warhammer 3 races, has the biggest gaps in the roster still standing, I think. Yeah, I think that's probably true. So let's have a look at what we're missing in the Empire, and we'll start with Legendary Lords. Now, the Legendary Lords I think we're missing, and sort of in terms of the army book, 8th edition army book, always the starting basis for a lot of the armies in Total War Warhammer, although they do deviate in terms of sort of different races and things like that, but that's what they like to pretend is their foundation. So let's go off that. Off of that, we are missing a couple of characters. We are missing Kurt Helborg and Ludwig Schwarzhelm. Now, we're missing Kurt, the Reichsmarshal, the leader of Karl Franz's armies. He is the top general in the Empire. And Ludwig is basically Franz's bodyguard, his standard bearer, an absolute unit in his own right. He is a very well-respected member of the Empire, and we've not seen either of them make an appearance yet. In terms of other stuff that I think fans will want to see for Legendary Lords, we do have Volton. Now, Volton had a fun thing that I think they kind of threw away in the end times, but we shall not we shall not talk about the filth that is the end times. But I like the concept that people are like, is this Sigmar reborn? He is a poor villager who almost single-handedly worked in his father's smith, Beastmen attack, and single-handedly he grabbed 2 hammers out of the smith and went to town on a whole horde of Beastmen, fighting them off. He was then found by Luthahus, a Sigmarite priest, took him away, presented him to the Emperor. He was like, look, this is Sigmar. He has the birthmark of the twin-tailed comet on his chest. It's all sort of portents are pointing to this being Sigmar reborn, which put Karl Franz in an awkward position where he was like, well, I can't have this village boy taking my empire off of me, so how we have to appease the masses and the religious zealots, but also, you know, keep control and maintain my empire. And he did this by giving him Galmaraz. I'm not going to go too much into Volton's story, but he is a cool character that I think should definitely be included in Total War Warhammer. There is actually a fantastic mod out for Total War Warhammer 2, not for free yet at the time of this recording, but I'm sure it'll be ported along any day now. Volton, I think, will probably make an official appearance in the game, along with maybe Luthahus as well, the guy who found him and kind of looks after him and brings him along. So we might see the two of them. We might just see Volton and maybe have Luthahus as an ancillary because he's a bit generic looking. He just looks like a priest of Sigmar, and we have enough of them in the game as it is. So who knows? We might get him as a unique character. We might get him as an ancillary for Volton. We'll have to wait and see. Another one worth mentioning at this point that I did bring up earlier in the video during the Tamurkhan section is Elspeth von Draken, a fun character, a female legendary lord for the Empire. CA will probably want to include her for that alone at some point, I imagine. But, you know, a Wizard of Death makes an appearance. In terms of generic units now, let's get into it. We need a whole faction of lords that are missing from the Empire, and those are the Wizard Lords. On top of the Wizard Lords, we are missing a generic wizard of the lore of metal. We have Balthazar Gelt, but he's the only one at the moment. He is the head of all wizards, as well as the head of the Order of Gold, which is the lore of metal wizards. So, you know, can we get them in the game, please? So moving on from Lords, we are also missing the Empire Master Engineer. A lot of fun stuff to do here. There's the wonderful mechanical steed, a great concept for a unit. Although, you know, I'm not going to get into the science of how the thing would work, because it probably wouldn't. But I like the idea of the mechanical steed making an appearance in Total War Warhammer as the engineers ride atop them. Also, perhaps, you know, an option for them as a mount later on in the campaign. We give them a steam tank. I mean, we give a lot of the Lizardmen heroes have enormous dinosaurs to ride upon, so why not give the engineer a steam tank when he's sort of nearing max level? I think that would be a good concept. We're also missing the Celestial Hurricanum. Should help with Winds of Magic, should have a few bound spells, a pretty cool little tool here as well. But that's a pretty important thing missing from the Empire as it stands. Let's talk about Knightly Orders. We've had a few of them in the game already. We've had the Knights of Moor, the Knights of the Everlasting Light, but almost purposefully, Creative Assembly look like they've been missing out two of the most famous Knightly Orders that people really want in the game, and that is the Knights Panther and the White Wolves, both of which are very well established Knightly Orders. The White Wolves particularly distinguish themselves in terms of being a kind of not charge focused necessarily, but real melee, the concept for them perhaps being that they really stick it out in melee, armed with their hammers. So hopefully we get to see these two factions in the game at some point. They are much more famous, much more beloved than the Knights of Moor or the Knights of the Everlasting Light. That is stuff I'm pretty sure will be in any Empire DLC we get. Stuff coming up after this I'm a bit less sure about, but if they're trying to fill out a faction-only Empire DLC, they could do this. You could fill out the rest of the Empire, much like the Champions of Chaos. A whole bunch of heroes. You could do every elect account. You could make them all playable, include the units I've mentioned, and then throw these in on top, and that's a pretty hefty single faction DLC, as well as all the sort of heroes and lords I mentioned at the top of this section. But you throw that in, you throw in the White Wolves, the Knights Panther, you get us the Halfling Scouts, the Halfling Hot Pot, the Land Battleship from Marienburg, although you could argue is maybe a bit redundant when compared to the Steam Tank, but make it somewhere in between the Steam Tank and the War Wagon. Somewhere like that. It could fit a nice little niche, able to get a bit earlier than the Steam Tank, and it's just such a fun, silly unit. Put it in the game. Come on, guys. It'll be great to see. Even just make it memey. Don't even make it a good unit. I just want to see it trotting around the battlefield. We may also get with the engineer theming in this pack, we may get a kind of Nuln long rifle. that we see. Maybe they mass produce them. We could get a unit of them making an appearance. That's a bit iffier. That's not necessarily an official unit, but if CA are looking for stuff to fill out an entire faction DLC, they could do it that way. Also, hunting dogs, a bit of an old school unit, but it is slightly missing from the Empire roster in terms of a dog unit that can just quick and chase down stuff. Maybe not as good as the dire wolves or, you know, any of the other sort of supernatural kind of dogs we have in Total War Warhammer at the moment, but it's an option to include in the Empire roster. There's also some more Midland themed things that you could throw in there, and that would be the Priest of Ulrich. Great little addition there, a sort of a different variety of Priest of Sigmar, maybe work slightly differently. Because there is so much for the Empire to actually fill in, you could actually almost do, as half of one faction DLC, an entire Midland one, where you do Priest of Ulrich, you do Knights Panther, Knights of the White Wolf, and then you throw in the unit of Teutonic Guard, a heavily armored foot unit armed with hammers. And then you maybe do something like Wolfkin, a sort of berserker, stalking, scout type unit. That could be interesting. And then you have that's a Midland versus Dwarves or Greenskins or something like that. That's a complete option you could have out there as well. So you could split this whole bunch of Empire stuff into 2 different DLCs. Maybe you do a Midland one, make Boris playable. He's been in the game. I wouldn't say like include him as the Lord, because that would feel like a bit of a jib considering we've had him in the game for so long. But maybe you put Volton in there. Volton, when he made the appearance, famously part of Storms of Chaos, something that's been retconned out of existence, but that's when the Empire made its stand against Chaos at Middenheim. And so, you know, have Volton hanging around that area of the world. Maybe going up against Snagler Grobspit of the sort of Spider Riders in that area of the world, which is included in the Realms of Chaos map. So that fits in terms of a couple of the things we've been looking for. And there are a few, we haven't touched on the Greenskin pack yet, but we'll get to that in a minute. So you could do a Midland versus Greenskins, and then maybe give us the Empire one versus someone else later on down the road. But there is a lot of space there for the Empire to be filled in, including, you know, last but not least, the Imperial Dragon for Karl Franz. Stays in the zoo. Give us the Imperial Dragon, please. That would be a great little addition for the fans right there, giving Karl Franz his dragon. So that about sums it up for the Empire, really. Either one big DLC, could be split into 2 different versus DLCs, but there is a lot to go, and hopefully by the end of Total War Warhammer 3, we get to see all of those units make an appearance. So fingers crossed for that. I'm not going to guess if we're going to split the DLCs in 2, if we're going to split Empire stuff in 2, who's going to go against 2, but just consider this, like, these are the units we have in the Empire. They may go up against one of these other factions in a DLC. Let's say that as Legendary Lords, we are probably going to get Kurt Helborg and Volton at the very least. Boris will be there, but we know where Boris will be. He'll be in Middenheim. That's just where he'll be if he's ever made a playable character. The other 2 are a bit more up for the debate. So let's have a fool around and guess. Again, Empire, one of the hardest DLCs to predict, but we're going to say Volton and Kurt will make an appearance at some point. What format that takes, who's to say? In the Realm of Chaos campaign, Volton, I think, as we discussed earlier in the video, might be making an appearance around Midland or around Nordland. That area, you know, fending off Beastmen, fending off the Norscan raiders that are coming in, the enemies of the Empire as Sigmar reborn, and really sort of blazing a trail through in those areas. If Boris becomes playable, it maybe complicates that, but I think Boris, if anything, he'll become playable on Immortal Empires and not on the Realm of Chaos campaign map. So I think this spot will be pretty available to Volton. In terms of Kurt Helborg, we have moved him out to the east. Maybe on a mission from Karl Franz to find another sort of Silk Road route, create some profitable ways to deal with the Empire of Cathay, maybe reach out for aid as chaos comes down on everyone around the area. It's a bit of a random guess, I'm going to say, of Kurt Helborg. You don't necessarily want him in the middle of the Empire. That's just him kind of getting in the way. There's not a huge amount to fight in the center of the Empire as far as it stands, but around the edges there's a lot of stuff going on, so dealing with Chaos Dwarves, dealing with Galrosh out there, potentially dealing with Hellbrass as he moves further towards Cathay, and then maybe having to fight his way past the Ogres and the Monkey King to reach Cathay. That might be a quest line for him there. You know, I'm just toying around with ideas here for Kurt, but really you could almost put him anywhere, and it would actually make a lot of sense just on an expedition force under the orders of Karl Franz. In terms of Immortal Empires, we've kept with the same current kind of theme and thinking, in that Kurt may be heading off to the east, with backing up Imrik over there, going up against Nurgle, going up against the vampire counts, ogres, maybe even the Monkey King, dealing with Ind, and trying to get to Ind or Cathay, something along those lines for Kurt. And Volton, we've done a bit of a switch, because if Boris does get made playable, he will be playable on the Immortal Empires campaign, and that kind of kicks Boris out of the Midland Nordland area. They'd be a bit too close together. So I thought, you know what, back in the day, if you've listened to my Azazel lore video, we touched upon this a bit. Sigmar launched basically a campaign of genocide against the Norsca, who are the tribe that the Norskins all come from. And he went to, purge their new lands. And Volton, led by Luther Huss, the religious extremist, might be doing the same to try and burn out all the heretics from the northern lands of the Empire and deal with the threat once and for all. So those two potentially heading off in that land, maybe heading towards Be'lakor to deal with him. I think that's a fun start position for them in the Empire, just trying to go through. They would have to get some regional, leeway in terms of what they can colonize and what they can't. Maybe giving the Empire the same sort of cold weather buff that Kislev has in terms of occupying Norsca, at least for their faction. And that could be a fun little campaign to play, going through Norsca, dealing with Wulfric, dealing with Be'lakor, backing up the Norscan factions and the demons that are inevitably going to pour in there as well. So that's where I think could be a couple of fun campaigns for the Empire Legendary Lords. Next up, let's talk about the big guy himself, Nagash. We've had hints that he's been coming. We've seen the end game resolution of the Tomb Kings rising up from the Black Pyramid, very much in a hint that Nagash will be coming, will be rising again, and leading the legions of the dead with him. So we will have Nagash coming to the game, I'm convinced of it. And I think just because of the importance of the character, this might in fact be a single faction DLC, rather than trying to muddy the waters with having Nagash go up against anyone. They could put him up against Volton of the Empire to kind of replicate the famous clash between Sigmar and Nagash back in the day. That's a possibility. But I think they also might just put him out by himself. Again, as we said with the Empire, there's enough there for at least a couple of DLCs. So they might split it and do it with this, because there's not a huge amount of units that we know of that could be added. They could put some twists on existing units, but in terms of unique units that are new, when there's not a huge amount of them left in the undead faction for Nagash. Plus, he'll probably have access to a lot of the units from the other undead factions, which I think he should have access to, including the Vampire Coast, including the Tomb Kings. So he's going to have a lot of options in terms of what he'll be able to do. There's also the oddity of there is another significant undead character, and that is Neferata, who we haven't heard about yet. I did theorize for a while that Neferata might be her own DLC. A lot of the Vampire Count units, or a couple of them, have links to Neferata. So you'd think a thematic versus pack would have been starring Neferata. But I think if they're doing Nagash, there's not really enough there to do two Vampire Count DLCs, or Undead DLCs if you prefer. And so I think these will be combined, and this is how. I think with Nagash, if he's a single faction DLC, we will get a representative from each of the vampire bloodlines thrown into his DLC pack as well. For the Lamian bloodline, of course, we have Neferata, the first vampire. She'll be leading the Lamian faction. She'll probably be starting at Silver Pinnacle. That's where she is meant to be in the lore. Neferata goes on to become one of the head sort of lieutenants, shall we say, of Nagash. So her coming in the same pack as Nagash makes a lot of sense. Whether she starts off in her sort of old school mode and then builds up to the hatted mode, you never know. But the Nagash DLC really did a fun thing where he started off Nagash with his old school model and he built up to his most recent model, which I thought was a really nice touch and would be cool to see applied by CA in terms of Neferata, as well as applying it to Nagash, because I think that mod in Total War Warhammer 2 really set the bar very high. And so hopefully we get to see that level of excellence in what Creative Assembly offer us as well. In terms of the Strigoi bloodline, we could have Ushuran, although he is technically dead, but, you know, they're all undead, so why not bring him back? or just another kind of leader of the Strigoi could replace him there. In terms of the von Carsteins, we have a good handful of them already in terms of Vlad and Manfred and Isabella, but there is one notable exception who is missing, and that is the lunatic Conrad von Carstein. If you want a bit of a lore on Conrad and some of the other missing Vampire Count Legendary Lords that I did back in the day, do check out a video popping up in the top right-hand corner now, or you'll find a link down in the description below that just goes over all the lore, because I'm not going to dive into all their lore too deeply in this video. We'll be looking at Conrad here, an absolute sort of melee powerhouse he should be in terms of when we get him in Total War Warhammer 3. And then we have Washoranov, the Shurin, and he is dead and cannibalized by his student, but they might attempt to bring him back as the founder of the bloodline, or they might bring back his student who killed him and ate him, who was Melchior, or they might bring in the guy who then usurped Melchior to take up the head of the Necroc sort of bloodline, and that was Zacharias. It could be any of those three, really, for the Necrocs, but we'll have to wait and see who we get. And I'd love to see for the Blood Dragons, I know this is the logo that Manfred uses, but it really does represent Blood Dragons a little bit better than his faction, and that is Abarash, the founder. Now, he could present an interesting opportunity to be kind of a good vampire. In the sort of later lore, he has sort of pledged his allegiance to Gilles le Breton. They built La Maisontal Abbey together, where you get a few quest battles in Total War Warhammer. If not Abarash, then we will probably get Wallach, and he's the current leader of the sort of Blood Dragon Order. So I think we'll get those Legendary Lords, as well as Nagash, and that will be 6 Legendary Lords in the pack, which is a bit more than the Champions of Chaos one, but I think we're going to be getting less units than we did in the Champions of Chaos one, so it kind of balances out that way. I think we're going to get an iconic mount option when Nagash rose, and those are the Dread Abyssals. Given to Manfred, Neferata, and Arkan the Black. And so they'll hopefully get these cool new mounts. Each one is individual to their rider. So you can see here they are pretty cool looking and will make very interesting mounts for our existing Legendary Lords and hopefully Neferata if she comes as part of the pack as well. In terms of who we'll get, if there'll be sort of generic heroes and lords, there is a missing hero in the vampire roster, and I'm not sure if we're gonna see them, and that's the Cairnwraith, who is more of more of an attacky-focused, melee-focused version of the Banshees we see in the game already. But the problem is that they had a missile attack in the tabletop game. This guy didn't, and that was kind of a distinct differentiation. He could also have a special attack that just ignores all armor. Whether they include him or they feel he's slightly redundant as a hero character, I'm not entirely sure. It could go one way or another. They could try and differentiate him in other ways in the way he plays in Total War Warhammer 3. But it's a pretty cool, looking unit, and it would be great to have them as an addition. There's another mount that was an old school mount known as the Abyssal Terror, which is this kind of dark flying mount, which we might see added to the game as well. That is missing off their roster, so you never know. Look out for that one. And there is, of course, the Lamian-themed Coven Throne. Very much a similar model to the Mortis engine, but with vampiresses, Lamian vampiresses on top. On the tabletop, the way that the Coven Throne was distinguished from the Mortis engine is that the Mortis engine did aura damage in terms of distance around it. The Coven Throne would affect you if you tried to attack it, and you'd engage in what would be known as the Battle of Wills, whereby you'd usually hit what would be construed in Total War Warhammer 3 as your melee attack, your chance to hit. And if it really went well, you could actually affect the unit that was trying to attack you. And it could tank a bit more damage with a 4-up ward save than the Mortis engine as well. Basically, in many ways, it was a toned-down Mortis engine. There are different ways they could use to distinguish it from the Mortis engine in Total War Warhammer 3. How they do that, we're yet to be seen, but I look forward to hopefully seeing it on the battlefield as we go along. After the Coven Throne, we might see the Spirit Host. These were used on the tabletop really as sort of blocking units. They weren't particularly effective on the attack, but they could really hold up units for a long time. And we could see that used as well. Or they might think the Spirit Hosts are, unnecessary and redundant by the Cairnwraith infantry unit. So we never might not see them, but hopefully we do in terms of offering a different kind of ethereal infantry unit for the vampire counts there. There is also the End Times unit, which is the Morghast. These are heavy hitters, flying heavy hitters that will be able to come in with Nagash. I'm pretty sure these guys are pretty iconic, I think, for Nagash at this point. And so it'd be a bit of a shame if we didn't get them in the game. And so, due to their popularity, I think CA will probably throw these guys in with any kind of Nagash DLC. So with those lords, those units, maybe they throw in an old school unit like the mummies or something like that to really fill out the roster, because there's not a lot of units there in terms of filling out a DLC. But the lords in there, and maybe hopefully with the new mechanics those lords would come with, would make the DLC worth it. And of course, you'd be getting the big guy himself, Nagash. So hopefully that will work out that way. I think it will be a single faction DLC. So for these lords, it will get a bit confusing because we do have the Von Carstein's already representative, and Manfred's using what I think would be a great banner for the Blood Dragons. So let's switch those out for these two above them, as you see, and let's have a talk about how they might appear in the Realm of Chaos and Immortal Empires map. So for the Realm of Chaos, as you can see, with these 6 new flags, the map's starting to get a little bit busy. Let's start over on the left. We have the Blood Dragons in the Marshes of Corone, maybe looking for their founder, Abarash. Their main temple, as I mentioned, is probably in Wiesenland, and they are maybe just looking for their old master, Wallach, maybe leading the way there, or even Abarash himself making an appearance, as he's last known to have been sort of knocking around Bretonnia. Next, as we move right across the map, we have the Necrarchs. Now, they lived in the Forest of Shadows, which is around the top and right-hand side of the Middle Mountain. And that's their sort of ancestral place where they settled after the great cities of the Southern Realms were destroyed, the great undead cities. And so they're known to hang around this area. It is fun to maybe have a undead vampire count faction a little bit further away from Sylvania, starting in the Empire, able to wreak havoc on both Kislev and the Empire immediately from a vampire count point of view. We then, in Sylvania, have Nagash starting there. In the End Times, of course, as much as I hate to speak about it, it was sort of Manfred's actions that led to the resurrection of Nagash. So him starting out in Sylvania, not too bad. We won't have Manfred playable. We won't have Vlad playable on the Realm of Chaos map. So, let Nagash have that area for himself. We also have Neferata, of course, in her well-known territory, her well-known fortress, the Silver Pinnacle. So we're going to put her there. And in terms of the Strigoi, I think they should be I was thinking maybe just put them in another barren wasteland. Kind of a thing for them. Maybe they're just like feeding off the scraps, and you don't want them in anywhere too nice. Otherwise, why would they be feeding off scraps and cannibalization and all that kind of nastiness that the Strigoi love to get up to? And so we put them in the howling wastes of the Darklands there. Last but by no means least, the Von Carsteins, whether it's Conrad or someone else, is up there in the east. Maybe Conrad, resurrected, didn't want to have to deal with the Empire again, decided to see if the Eastern Empires might be a little less trouble for him to conquer. And so maybe wanders out there, giving another Vampire Count faction pressing on their western border. In terms of Immortal Empires, let's see where these guys might shake out and be, where might be a good place for them to go. And here we go. We have Nagash in Nagashazar. We have the Strigoi, a little bit, because the Beastmen kind of take over that territory, they're around there. It depends, there's a few settlements out there in the Badlands where you could place them, maybe trying to reclaim their lost city and taking on the Beastmen for it, at least early on in the campaign. So we've got the Strigoi out there, dealing with Greenskins, dealing with Skaven, dealing with Galrosh. Fun little placement there. Going up, we have the Necrarchs around the same area as well, somewhere in Ostland, putting pressure around the Empire and Kislev, really, adding another faction and another problem for the forces of order up in the north. And, don't have a lot of factions with the north for vampire counts easily accessible, so why not put the Necrarchs up there? We've moved the Blood Dragons a little bit further south to actual Wiesenland, where their temple is, to give them those bonuses, and they'll be able to strike out at Geld or the Empire from its soft underbelly, maybe helping to either go with or against, depending if you give them Abarash. Maybe he's actually helping the Empire fight and going up against Vlad. Who's to say? and stopping sort of the end times coming. We've also got the sort of backdoor into possibly the Wood Elves, stuff like that. So, pretty central area for the Blood Dragons there. And, of course, Conrad still, I want, pushing on the western edges of Cathay. And, of course, Neferata, Silver Pinnacle, Nagash, Nagashazar. Those are just their natural homes. It would be weird to put them anywhere else. So while we're on the subject, let's take a moment to talk about the potential Jade Vampires. There has been this faction icon appearing in the game in Immortal Empires, and I think it may be in the Realm of Chaos, but I'll be honest, it's been a while since I started up a Realm of Chaos campaign, so I'm not entirely sure. I can't confirm that one. But this icon represents a line of vampires that went back to the very beginning and was an addition in one of the editions of the role-playing game of Warhammer Fantasy. Now, they went on to have their own distinct way of playing, and they will be very much taking from the undead lore of the Far East, which is quite different and does allow a lot of potential in terms of even maybe being able to create a new faction, if not just adding a couple of units for variety and taste into the existing vampire count lore. Now, we don't really sure if this will happen. We have been burnt before. Let us not forget Mousillon. We still don't have that Bretonnian-themed undead faction, and they've been around for a very long time. So I'm going to mention the Jade Vampires. It is a possibility that we get them either as just a couple of new units and a couple of new lords, maybe even thrown in with the Nagash one, you never know, or even a faction in its own right. But because of the way we've been burnt before, I'm not going to count on it, and I think it will maybe be quite far down on Creative Assembly's list of to-dos in terms of adding in the Jade Vampires, and I think this is just a little tease that they like to throw at us from time to time. In terms of where they are on the map, if you guys haven't come across them in Immortal Empires, you'll see them here. They're just on the far right of Cathay, and they are nestled between Yin Yin and Li Dao in terms of the dragon's territories, and giving Nakai the Wanderer a bit of a run for his money and trouble down in that area, I believe, is where they are currently based. Now let's talk about the Demons of Chaos. This is a bit of an odd one. It's a faction with basically a complete unit list in terms of the army book in 8th edition. I think they have everything, at least as far as I can tell. And that is a bit of a problem in terms of what we can look forward to DLC. There are a number of characters still left in the book that we haven't seen yet. If we're going to get a pack with maybe one of those characters for each faction, we'd probably be looking at Skull Taker for Khorne, Epidemius for Nurgle, the Mask for Slaanesh, and the Changeling for Tzeentch. That does leave a couple of extra characters left over in the book, namely Karanak, who is a hound, a sort of specialized hound of Khorne. Shouldn't really be leading armies, he is a dog after all. And the Blue Scribes, who are known to be sort of going around the world trying to write down every spell for their master. Those would be the characters that we're missing. That seems like quite a lot. Like, I've gone through this DLC, and there does seem to be quite a lot of stuff we might be expecting in sort of free DLC that doesn't really have any supporting units. So it's a bit tricky to know how these characters will be introduced. There are a couple of units that we could see that sort of around the edges of the army books and stuff like that have made an appearance in the Storm of Chaos, and that is the Pleasure Seekers with this new kind of mount for Slaanesh, in terms of what they would come in and do, a new kind of cavalry mount. But, Slaanesh does have a lot of cavalry as it stands, so you don't know if these guys will make an appearance. For the most part, the animations will probably be done with the snake mounts for the Tomb Kings. It's just a matter of probably reskinning those. And we'd also have the Plague Riders for Nurgle, but those are the only two other units I could really think of. In terms of, there are maybe some different variations of chariots that aren't included, but each faction has enough chariots as it is, I think, for the most part. Khorne has the Gorbeast chariots, Slaanesh has chariots up the wazoo, Tzeentch has the flying chariots. So it's a bit hard to know what they might add in any kind of Demons of Chaos DLC, apart from the characters. So at this point, I'm really stumped on the Demons of Chaos, ladies and gentlemen. So apologies for that, but apart from the characters, I'm not sure what else we might get to see for this faction. But if we are getting the characters, let's talk about their placement. As you can see, we're going to use these symbols to notify each one of the characters on the campaign maps. So let's have a look at where they might place. Now, at this point, you'll see that the campaign maps are actually getting a little bit busy, like fairly chocker. And so we are going to have a look at the Realms of Chaos campaign map, And let's try and squeeze these guys in somewhere that makes a bit of sense. Skulltaker, in some lore, in her book, is actually based around was once a Norscan warrior, and he was actually a demon prince who just kind of took the form of a bloodletter, but in everything else, he's just a really good bloodletter. So, the lore's a bit in conflict there. But, let's go on the history of the book a bit and say he had a lot of history fighting off his enemies in Norsca. So, putting him on the tip there, Festus to deal with, a potential ally up north, a lot of the Norskans to put under the thumb and claim the skulls of before fighting your way into the Empire and Kislev, and all of those delicious skulls and delicious blood for the Skulltaker. Moving to the east and north a bit, we have the Changeling up towards the northern edge, towards Realms of Chaos there. We have the Changeling on the Plane of Bones. There's a lot of space up here in the Chaos Waste, and we may as well get Tzeentch faction on the left-hand side of the map. Already got Kheresh knocking on the door of Cathay on the other side. So, let's get the Changeling over here, dealing with a Khorne, Nurgle, Gut Rot down to the south, and down to the south as well is maybe the Mask. The Mask is probably the most pissed off at Tzeentch and Khorne, because Slaanesh cursed the Mask to eternally dance, because he was hugely disappointed at a loss caused by the armies of Khorne, but a loss they were baited into by Tzeentch, the wise, who just kind of tricked Slaanesh into it. So the Mask has to serve the punishment for that. And so, would be pissed at Tzeentch and Khorne, and would maybe go after those factions up in the Chaos Waste. And of course, further north, we have Epidemius going up against Slaanesh, just throwing a Nurgle faction into the mix to the west side of the map there, just to, mix things up. And again, because we have so much space in the Chaos Waste part, rather than trying to cram more demon factions into the Empire or a very chocker-looking sort of Cathay who already has two factions knocking at their gates. I thought, put them in the Waste where they need to start out, have them take part in the great game between the Monogod. In Immortal Empires, we've mixed it up a bit in terms of where they are, and we've almost moved them all down south. So we have the Mask in the southern Chaos Waste, mainly put here because I think at this point, it's not been confirmed yet at the time of recording this, but Teclis and Kheresh are probably going to swap positions. So the Mask here has a chance to hit out at 2 Elven colonies, and any excuse for Slaanesh to get their hands on some Elven souls is a worthy one. And, it fills out the southern realms. They have Oxyotl there causing problems for them as well. In terms of Lustria, that was looking a bit sparse, if you ask me. And there's not a lot of demon factions in there for the lizard men to fight. They're known for fighting the demons. Kroq-Gar is nowhere near anybody demons to fight, and that's his favorite thing to do in the world. So we've moved the Changeling to the islands that Teclis used to be on in Mortal Empires, and we've moved Epidemius over to the western side of Lustria, so he can actually sail across, maybe give Cathay a few problems, with one of Nurgle's plague fleets causing trouble, a lot of access to a lot of different areas from there. He can sail down and cause trouble on both sides of the world with Epidemius there. And then Skulltaker, I wasn't really sure about. I think this is a good position for Skulltaker. Skulltaker, like Wulfric a bit, likes to take skulls of great champions. So is going around looking for great, and where better to grab skulls of great champions than the Southland Bowl? It really is the place to join in and get in on the action. Other than that, I was tempted to maybe put Skulltaker in Lustria as well, because there isn't a Khorne faction out there, so it could have been fun, but I decided to throw him into the Southland Bowl and see how he does there with all the other great champions who are fighting in that part of the world. Let's talk about Dogs of War, a potential mercenary faction. I think there are mechanics in the game that could make a Dog of War faction really entertaining, doing contracts for different factions, including orcs, bad guys, maybe be able to set, like in D&D, what kind of jobs you'd want to do, whether you want to be completely on the side of order, or you want to be neutral, or you want to be completely against the sides of order, is maybe something you can pick at the beginning of campaign, and that sort of dictates the kind of missions you can get set. And you'll have a running tally on the cost of your army. You get paid for doing jobs, taking out settlements, raiding in certain areas. Stuff like that, I think, could make a really fascinating kind of horde mechanic with a little bit of an extra twist. In terms of the lineup of any kind of Dogs of War faction, I have done a series on the Dogs of War, that you will see a thing popping up in the top right-hand corner, or there'll be a link down in the description below, going through the legendary lords, going through the units we can get, all of which are fantastic and entertaining, and going through a bit of the history of the region in Tilia and the Border Princes. So do check that out. The only addition I'd make to that video, which was made a few years ago now, is that I'd maybe include a character known as Leopold the Black. He made an appearance in the Tamurkhan story, and as I said, Tamurkhan seems to be quite an important player in terms of what's going on in Total War Warhammer 3, and his book in terms of the lore of the different areas in Total War Warhammer 3. So I think if we were to get a Dogs of War faction, we'd probably get Leopold at this point included with those legendary lords, and I may do a lore video on him further down the line. But I would like to see a Dogs of War faction. At this point, you know, we've been waiting for it for so long that I'm not going to hold my breath. But fingers crossed, we do get to see it in the game at some point. As well as that lore video, I might do a video on how, even just using the current mechanics in the game, you could do a really cool Dogs of War faction. Let me know if you'd like to see that video down in the comments below. In terms of the map, Dogs of War could go anywhere. So, you know, pick the legendary lords you'd want. They could go anywhere on the map. It's a bit of a crapshoot there. So, not going to get into the map for the Dogs of War. It's a bit too up in the air at this point. Up next, that's right, it's Kheresh. Now, for those of you who don't know, Kheresh is the land to the east of Ind. It is, unlike Ind, not mainly inhabited by humans, although they are humans who live there. It is the realm of these snake people, mainly run by these bloodthirsty Naga queens, these snake queens. Kheresh is a land we know very little about in terms of overall Warhammer lore, except that it is, of course, run by these snake people. And we did used to have some models way back in the day. There was a regiment of Citadel miniature snake men models that came out, as you can see here. Now, you know, it's a fun look for the snake men here early in their life. These ones were all actually named, which is kind of a fun little touch. This is what the sort of first snake men look like. I'm sure their design will be changed upon seeing them in Total War Warhammer 3. We see them painted up here as well, standing in a row. And the idea is that this is a these snake men are not fun. They do human sacrifices, they devour human blood, they are not a friendly place for any sort of large population of humans who are, in this land, probably just largely considered prey, or at the very best, sort of pack animals to be kept and harvested later. We also got a brand new snake man in some of the new Blood Bowl stuff. Now, this guy seems to be featuring along with the Amazonians, but you know, the snake men are known of Kheresh. Maybe there are a few of them in the Southlands, who knows? But this is the idea of them, and so this might be a bit more, give us a hint at what Games Workshop are looking at in terms of the future of snake men of Kheresh. And one unit we also know about that we've seen in the Warhammer world before is the Dreadmaw. Now, in one of the role-playing things, there is a bit of a new blurb about the Dreadmaw. They originally just said to be from the Chaos Wastes, and they sort of burrow through rock. But there is this new blurb here, as you can see on the right-hand side, that there are those within my order that believe the Dreadmaw originally comes from the distant hinterlands of Kheresh. Nightmarish tales involving the fabled Blood Naga Queens say that the Dreadmaw were created, not born. Created to prevent easy travel from the west. Such tales could be entirely dismissed as irrelevant hearsay, if not for the fact that the cult dedicated to those distant horrors was uncovered in Sylvania just a few years ago. One that had been attempting to enact a terrible blood ritual that would summon a Dreadmaw even onto the Empire. So, you know, I like the idea that these huge rock snakes are part of perhaps the army of Kheresh, a creature that they can summon forth in its sort of horrible snake-like being. So that's a new bit of lore about an old creature in the Warhammer world, so we may see the Dreadmaw appearing for Kheresh. Now, we also know that Kheresh is home to a lot of Beastmen in their territory, particularly in the northern part of their territory. So whether the Snake Men are kind of an offshoot of the regular Beastmen that we know and love, who's to say? But they are known to inhabit, if not fight, over the same space, with the Snake Men coming out on top in that particular territory. And there has been some great concept art about what these guys might look like. Obviously here, taking on a sort of Thai, Cambodian kind of aesthetic for the Naga snakes of Kheresh. You know, some beautiful stuff done by the artists and the community around, trying to guess at what these horrors might look like. But that's about it for Kheresh. We really don't know what variation of unit they might go for. We know their leaders, lords, probably will be the Naga queens. We know they'll probably have some form of Snake Man infantry. But apart from that, we're a bit in the dark. And we'll just have to wait to see what comes slithering forth from the creative minds at Games Workshop and Creative Assembly. In terms of the map, and we're using this cool snake symbol to represent Kheresh. Once we have Kheresh coming through, it'll be tricky not to have it be a separate campaign map, because you'd have Ind way over there, unless they can really kick that thing over to the right a whole bunch. Kheresh will be over to the right, further right than Ind, and maybe even up a bit. It'll be a bit tricky, yeah. And with the shape of this map, especially as you go further down and south in the world. So really not a lot to show you on the Realms of Chaos map. In terms of Immortal Empires, the legendary lords of Kheresh would be spread around Kheresh, much like Ind. And if you don't know where Kheresh is, here it is, down here on the map. So not much more to say than that on the map. Kheresh will be in Kheresh, and they'll be coming up, and if we get the snake people marching all over, we get Slaanesh down south dealing with stuff, the map is starting to look pretty good, in my opinion. And so we have the Greenskins. This is a bit of a tricky one in terms of characters and legendary lords, so let's get stuck right into it and see what we've got. The most famous of the orcs that we still have outstanding, that are mentioned in the 8th edition book, is Gorbad Ironclaw. Many centuries ago, I think at this point, Gorbad led a war straight into the heart of the Empire and nearly took Altdorf itself, but eventually is thought to have been hunted down and killed by the Dwarves. Now, there is a way, they're sort of left open-ended in terms of Gorbad, but he hasn't been heard of in the Empire, which is usually the point of view that we get most of our Warhammer history from, in a good long while. So no one knows what became of Gorbad if he didn't die at the hands of the Dwarves back in the day. So he might be rampaging around the Badlands in the east. Who's to say? They might throw him back in the mix. We also have Gatilla the Hunter. Now, this guy was much more of a hero, leading really a squad of a wolf pack rather than any sort of army. But he is the orc and goblin, or goblin more specifically, who's best known for going east and kind of hunting and marauding around the east of the World Edge Mountains, so more towards the territory of the Chaos Dwarves and the Ogres. In terms of territories covered in Total War Warhammer 3, he might be a bit of a front runner, but again, not necessarily known for leading armies, so is he going to be the choice? Other than Gatilla the Hunter, we also have Snagler Grobspit, the Spider Rider. You know, an interesting choice in terms of the territory. He could take up the Black Pit position in the Total War Warhammer map, both in Immortal Empires and the Realm of Chaos maps, and, you know, give you a greenskin vantage point from playing straight in the middle of the Empire. That could be a fun little exercise to do, because that's his home turf, really, and he does have a lot of those Spider Riders. But also a hero character, I think, classically, so don't know if he'll necessarily be making the rounds. And in terms of the Greenskins, we're going to talk about the generic characters here a bit. There are a lot of gaps, technically, in the Greenskin lineup, because there's a lot of variants missing. So we don't have Savage Orcs with dual weapons, for example, but we do have Savage Orcs in the game. And it's just a lot of that in terms of the lords and heroes. There's not a Night Goblin war boss, but there is a Goblin war boss. Stuff like that I think Creative Assembly, on the most part, is going to ignore, I hate to say. So I don't think we're going to see all of those variants filled out, as we haven't for a number of factions, but I think there's a particularly sort of big gap in terms of the variation of the units in the Greenskin army. Putting that aside, what else might we see then if we're not going to get all these variants filled in, if Creative Assembly sort of deems them slightly redundant? Well, in terms of the Lords and Heroes, I think they might just pick any combo. I think we might get, we don't have an Orc Magic user as a Lord option, whether that be a savage orc shaman or a normal orc shaman, who's to say. And I think in the hero category, it's a bit trickier to say, because we've got the trolls, we've got the orc shaman, we've got the black orc big boss, so we've got a melee orc covered there. We've got the night goblin shaman, and we've got the goblin big boss, so we've got melee and magic covered goblin as well as the trolls. So it's a little bit tricky. I'm not sure what they could go for, but there are a number of options. There are almost too many options for me to pick if they're just going to go off a variety. Are we going to get a goblin shaman as a hero? That could be a choice, something like that, as opposed to the night goblin shaman. Who's to say? So it's a bit tricky. I'm not sure what the hero would be in this pack, but there are a number of options. In terms of units, there are some fun units that are still missing from the goblin roster. We have the bolt thrower, the goblin spear chucker that's missing. We have snotlings as an expendable kind of unit. Having seen what they were able to do with the nurglings, we might be able to see that, particularly as goblins now can pose a bit of a threat to swordsmen, which, again, is something I have a bit of a problem with, but depending on your setup, they can be problematic for swordsmen. Snotlings might be just an expendable, even cheaper option to throw to block things' paths. Apart from snotlings, we also have something that I thought would be a bit too tricky to animate, but again, seeing the magic they managed to do with the nurglings, sort of piling on top of each other, making whips, I think the Mangler Squig isn't beyond the abilities of Creative Assembly in terms of being able to animate this pretty complicated idea of two monster squigs being chained together and causing a lot of damage. So we may actually get to see the Mangler Squigs making an appearance in Total War Warhammer 3. As well as the Mangler Squigs, we have the Colossal Squigs. Just absolute single-entity monsters charging into battle, making one hell of an impact as they go. And last but not least, sticking to a theme you might notice, we have the Squid Gobber, a new artillery piece. They poke this squig and it just vomits out little squigs at quite the distance. So that could be a very fun unit to have as well. So bearing in mind the cool units we're kind of missing from the roster, we're probably going to have some kind of goblin-themed pack, one could probably assume. Whether that be the Spider Rider themed with Snaggler or the Wolf Rider out to the east with Gatilla the Hunter, a bit hard to say. Or they just go with, screw it, we'll just throw in Orc, Gorbad Ironclaw. Not sure which legendary lord they might be going for, or it might be one I haven't thought of, but I think those are the three front runners as far as I'm concerned. We could get Gorfang Rockgut. Rockgut could be an option, but, it's just hard to say which direction they'll take. But the pack itself has a bit of a goblin theme, so probably a goblin legendary lord I think would fit in quite nicely. That would be the Greenskins if they want to fill out the rest of the roster with some really good units there. Again, skipping out on the variants, I think Creative Assembly feel might be redundancies, so they're probably going to not do those, in my opinion. You never know, so we'll have to wait and see on that one. It may also be worth here briefly discussing Lord packs. As I'd mentioned over the course of the video, there is potential for Lord packs such as the Elector Counts, the Dukes of Bretonnia, some more of the Vampire Count characters, of which there are still quite a few tucked away, and you could introduce all these characters as large Lord packs. So that might be something to look out for, but because we haven't seen them before, and I think it's maybe a bit of a hard sell in terms of here are just some lords, and particularly because you could probably only do one faction at a time, making sure that the people who own Total War Warhammer 3, what percentage of them have access to the Vampire Counts, for example, to be able to justify doing a DLC for Vampire Count Lords, or even Empire Lords for that matter. So at this point, I'm not thinking they're going to be a reality, but it is something worth keeping an eye on as a possibility in the future for Total War Warhammer DLC. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk timelines and when we think this stuff will be coming around and what order we think it might be coming around in as well. For the most part in this video, I sort of cobbled together the DLC packs I think we might get, and that's not necessarily the order I think we'll get them in. So let's spend a bit of time talking about that. Now, when Total War Warhammer 1 came out, we were getting DLCs dropping at a rapid pace. On average, I think we were getting one every 1.5 months. That wasn't until there was a big gap. They were obviously working on Total War Warhammer 2 there. And so there was an 8-month gap, and then we got Norsca. I'm not necessarily going to count that last bit on the average, just because they were literally just working on another game. That's what slowed down their production. But if they were just making content for Total War Warhammer 1, they could have done it. at a pace of 1.5 months per DLC drop. And we got 5 paid DLCs. We're only going to be talking about paid DLCs at this point in terms of the scheduling for Total War Warhammer 3. Total War Warhammer 2 really took its time. It knew they were going to make another game in between with 3 Kingdoms, and so they started spacing it out a lot more. Also, they used to say the line that people complained they were updating the game too much in Total War Warhammer 1, but maybe if you're getting it too much of a rapid pace, if you're on a budget or something, I can maybe understand. When it came to Total War Warhammer 2, we were looking at one every about 5 months and a bit in terms of paid DLC. That's what it averaged out at over the life of the game. 5 and a bit months for Total War Warhammer 2 and 1.5 months for Total War Warhammer 1. Let's maybe take the difference and say about every 3 months we might be able to expect a DLC for Total War Warhammer 3. So if you do that, we got the Champions of Chaos DLC drop in August. That would suggest the next one's going to drop in November, and that is most likely going to be the Chaos Dwarves. So looking for that around November, before Christmas, makes a lot of sense, you know, the red and black, very Christmassy. So in the new year, we're looking around February. That's when I think the High Elves versus Norsca and Norsca update will drop. Then next 3 months later, we're looking around May. We're probably looking at the Cathay DLC. I think there's a real hungering for it in the community to get their hands on the Monkey King. And then we have August. That will probably be a race pack. The key element here in August is whether or not 2023 is the year the Old World is coming out. For you, those of you who don't know, the Old World is Games Workshop, the makers of Warhammer, reissuing Warhammer Fantasy and setting it a few hundred years in the past, around the time of Magnus the Pious, so not in the time of Karl Franz, but well before. As part of this, they're going to be releasing the new races. So we know there's Kislev, we know there's Cathay. They'll probably release those two as the starter set, the way Games Workshop is wont to do. So I don't think at that point we'll be seeing hints of Ind or Kheresh just yet. I think they'll be just trying to get the rule sets out, selling you Kislev, selling you Cathay, probably when the Old World launches. So assuming it's launching then, there's not a lot of marketing synergy they can do except for maybe bring out a Cathay Lord Pack. Would have come out in May. Maybe that's when they start taking pre-orders for Cathay armies in Games Workshop for the Old World if it does launch next summer. A bit tricky to say, but that leaves us at a weird thing because I don't think the armies of Ind or Kheresh would be ready and they wouldn't launch all those armies in one go. So what might we get as a race pack at this point if it's not going to be Ind or Kheresh? And this is where I think we might be able to fit in the Dogs of War race pack. It's old models. Games Workshop could reissue them, make an absolute mint. People want those models anyway. They're very sought after because they are so rare. You relaunch Dogs of War, easy for Games Workshop to do, synergy on what you're able to do in terms of the marketing together with Games Workshop. So I think Dogs of War could be a really good fit. If we're ever going to get it, we're probably going to get it then, provided that's when the Old World's launching. If not, might have to put that back a bit. Games Workshop tend to launch in the summer, their big projects, so we might have to wait another year if that's the case, if it doesn't launch in the summer of 2023. But if not, let's move on. What might be DLC 7? Probably going to be a Kislev one. Around that time, you know, winter-themed, Kislev are coming in, and for my guessing, I was thinking Kislev going up against Skaven and Thanquol, so getting that in the run-up to next Christmas. And then you're looking at February 2024, and that's probably when we're going to get the Tamurkhan DLC, the rest of the Warriors of Chaos stuff, and all those lords dropping around then. Then, after Tamurkhan in May of 2024, you're maybe looking at another big push from the Old World for Games Workshop. And this one might actually be Ind or Kheresh, or maybe both of them coming out at the same time as another pack for maybe even the second edition of the Old World game. That would be a bit of a push for a one-year turnaround and edition, but you know, you never know. And so I think that would be a synergistic marketing opportunity for them. And so in my thinking, you'd get Ind or Kheresh as a race pack at that point for Total War Warhammer 3. As in the previous year, open up a pre-order for those races, coming out maybe between May and August for Games Workshop. Then we go to August of that year, and we're probably looking at the Empire or an Empire Versus pack. Going into November, let's get a Dwarven and Orc DLC out. October would have just finished, and maybe Malachi Magnuson versus the Orcs there and all their big squigs, and there's the sort of Christmas gobbo as well, so that could be something that plays a part in terms of the marketing. But yeah, I think that's a nice spot for an Orc versus Dwarf DLC. And, you know, we talked about those two aspects of a DLC individually rather than necessarily pairing them together because they might be with other people. But I think that's a nice little fit for an Orc versus Dwarf DLC there. Then in February, maybe looking at the other race pack, which would be either the Indoor Kheresh, whichever one they didn't bring out in May. And then we are looking at the final one. You know, maybe the game's a bit old at that point. It's been a couple of years. And one thing that people will always buy back into will be the big man himself, Nagash, who I think people would come back to the game for if interest had dropped off a little bit by that point, which it inevitably would have done. So that's how I think it could go, guys. It's not how I'd want it to go in terms of what I want first, second, and third in terms of the DLC. It's just what I was thinking if I was Games Workshop and Creative Assembly and, you know, you're running a business, how can you do it? And in terms of what you need to get out there and what the fans are clamoring for and how do you keep their attention as the game continues to develop. For me, in case you're curious, my wish list would be Chaos Dwarves. I do want the Chaos Dwarves in the game. Can't wait to see them. Cathay, want to get the Monkey King going, then Nagash, then the Dogs of War, then Thanquol. You know, I put it as Skaven DLC this time rather than the Kislev because the Kislev stuff I don't really care about, but I do want Thanquol. Ind, Kheresh, curious what they'll look like. Then the Empire, filling in the last gaps for then, Tamurkhan and the rest of the Warriors of Chaos stuff. Then the Dwarves versus Orcs or whatever. And then High Elves Norsca because, you know, Gutrot Spume and the Sea Lord. I can live without the this flying chariot for the High Elves for a little bit longer. Much longer than I can live without Nagash in the game. So that's my personal wish list. Let me know what order you guys would like to see them down in the comments below. As we look here at a near complete Immortal Empires map where I could sort of place things, it does start to get pretty busy, doesn't it? So looking forward to seeing some of, not all of these legendary lords make an appearance in Total War Warhammer 3. The game has a lot of potential, and hopefully we see that potential play out. Guys, do please comment below. If you enjoyed any aspect of the video, please do leave a like. It really helps out the channel. But as always, guys, a huge thank you for watching, and I hope to catch you all on the next one. Alright, guys? Bye.